There are people who are so unlucky that you almost feel sorry for them. But at the same time, these people are so damned that it is scary to approach them because you are afraid that their failures may be contagious. Kong-san was just such a person. The day brought me very pleasant news. All TV channels were talking about the same thing. A sudden manifestation of an interdimensional rift was detected. It caused monsters to attack civilians. The news reported casualties. There were 6 dead and 33 wounded and 3 missing. Everyone listened to the announcer. The announcer said that some were identified as parents of children who were in the kindergarten. The tragedy unfolded before everyone's eyes. In the blink of an eye, he was left without parents. All his inheritance was appropriated by distant relatives whom he had never seen before, and he grew up as an orphan. He had it really hard, unlike other normal children. He needed to be very attentive and also understand from an early age in which direction to move in life. From a young age, Kong-san acquired something that was not typical of other children. He acquired a firm, unwavering determination. He was driven by an unwavering desire to succeed and did things accordingly. He studied and worked at a frantic pace, barely finding time to sleep. He was smart and talented and never missed an opportunity to learn something new. But fate didn't give him a drop of luck. He failed the exam because at exactly that time his appendix ruptured. On the day of the next exam, the bus that Kong-san was riding on overturned, causing him to be late. And then something completely stupid happened when he was leaving the house. The front door was blocked by a fallen bicycle which prevented the guy from attending the exam that day. Such cases happened all the time. He was a complete failure. It was the label of failure that was put on Kong-san, and in the end he began to rely only on miracles. Even getting a job became a whole quest, not to mention entering the Hunter's Academy. And in the end, awakening became his only hope. Those chosen by the gods were talented from the very moment they were born, but for some it only awakened at the age of 20. Those whose talent awakened much later also became hunters. From that day on, Kong-san never allowed himself to be lazy again. He never stopped trying and doing everything possible to get rid of the label of a loser and keep his dream. He handed over a document stating that he had an F rank. The man was surprised that Kong-san tried to awaken talent without having a single skill and noted that innate talent allowed one to become part of the top 1%. The man handed the documents back to Kong-san and noted that he was in the bottom 1%. Even the office worker who had long ago given up on his dream of becoming a hunter couldn't help but laugh when he saw Kong-san. At that moment, the young man finally lost all hope. A long time passed until he turned 25. Then a lot changed in his life, although he almost gave up. Now he fought monsters. He showed strength where others broke down, both morally and physically, giving up their positions. It was difficult because it was worth risking not just health but life in general. But Kong-san coped and showed good results. He could withstand the huge wolf monsters, although they were incredibly strong and huge. He focused only on the result and did not allow himself to be distracted by anything else. He drove away all thoughts and was determined only to win. This gave him a certain superiority and helped, if not to defeat the beast completely by force, then to gain time and take better positions. The beast tried to bite him with its teeth, but Kong-san was able to evade such deadly bites. Sometimes it was hard to even understand how such a young man managed to do all this and where he got so much strength to fight such monsters. But Kong-san was very clever and could think of a way out of many dangerous situations. The beast flew back from Kong-san's strong blow and scratched the asphalt with its skin. Kong-san turned to his comrade and shouted at him when he was going to use his magic. It was high time to do so. The comrade, gritting his teeth, shouted that he was giving him a shield and was indignant that Kong-san was demanding something from him, since he saw that there was no time for that. Kong-san cursed in dissatisfaction with the situation and quickly turned his gaze back to the beast. He was dissatisfied with his team, which included a mage as well as the first and second tanks. Kong-san thought that he should have thought carefully and guessed when he was just asked to join such a disgusting group. One of his team's accounts had already lost an arm, which was definitely not good. Kong-san thought that while they were buying him time, the mage should cast a spell against the enemies, but here he was not coping with his role at all. The monsters with ugly dog faces weren't that strong, but without magic, a rank F living shield couldn't handle 2 of those creatures at the same time. Kong-san was not prepared for this development. Team Mage Kan-san finally shouted that everything was ready, and asked his comrade to step aside in preparation to attack. He smiled and noted that he would finally get around to these dogs. Each of the team members breathed a sigh of relief because everyone had been waiting for this moment. Kong Sen hoped that everything would work out and that there would be no further problems. The beasts roared loudly. Their red eyes shone. The monsters were about to rush at the hunters again. The magician fired a bolt of magic lightning at the monsters from his fire magic bow. The magical energy collected in the spell flew at the monsters. But this lightning did not hit them and got stuck in the asphalt at their feet, only blinding the monsters with its bright flame. The next moment it went out, and the animals looked with some bewilderment at the team of hunters and at the pile of ashes from which smoke was rising. Kong Sen screamed and called the magician names. I understand that he ruined everything. He began to swear that the magician had spent all his energy on shooting at the ground and that he had apparently gone crazy. The magician did not admit his guilt at all and pointed out that everything seemed to be fine. A scream was heard from the side, which immediately brought Kong Sen back from his fit of anger. One of the tanks standing nearby was not there. The sword fell to the ground with a clang. The beast did not waste time, and having pinned the tank to the ground, was about to bite him in half. The tank tried to call for help, but could only squeeze out barely audible hoarse syllables. Kong Sen asked him to hold on and immediately rushed to help, but first he had to deal with the other beast. The magician meanwhile put his hand in front of him, and a funnel began to form in the air. Kong Sen kept in touch with his comrade in the clutches of the beast, shouting that he was about to save him, but suddenly out of the corner of his eye, he saw the magician take a step back. Kong Sen frowned even more as he turned to face the mage. The magician created a portal and was already halfway into it. Ken San was indignant that he was doing this silently without even notifying the others. He was only saving his own skin, and jokingly apologizing noted that it seemed to him that they would all die soon and it was worth leaving. Kong San was furious at such a vile act. The magician smiled and noted that he himself suggested going on a raid, and therefore it was a little awkward for him to do so, but at least one of them should survive. He emphasized that Kong San himself most likely had no desire to die in the clutches of such creatures and apologized for running away. But Kong San was not one of those people. Kong San was seething with anger that was building up inside him more and more. People often called Kong San a human shield. Although the real name of his profession was tank, no one even thought of calling him that. All the tanks were nothing more than cannon fodder. They were the social bottom, and no one would be bothered by their sudden death. That was life, and in general few people bothered about such things. Therefore the magician thought that he could escape here. Nothing could be done. Kong Sen rushed after him. He ran as fast as he could, hoping to make it before the portal closed. No one wanted to risk their lives to save the human shield. None of the guys on the team were important to each other. If the tank had been saved by Kong San, it would have suffered an even more terrible death. It was the latest in a long series of failures throughout his life, but he didn't know it yet. Kong Sen didn't have time to run, and the portal closed right in front of him. He did not want to die at that moment. Something amazing happened. He was chosen by Asmuna, the goddess of both suffering and trials. He looked at her and couldn't believe what was happening. The goddess sat at the very top, crossing her legs and looking at Kong San with a smile. She looked like any goddess would, confident and pleased with what was happening. Ken San did not understand how a magician could use such a portal, and when he saw Asmuna, he asked her about it. He was very confused, but the sight of the goddess made him even more confused. There were animals behind him, and something was happening in front of him that he couldn't fully explain to himself. The goddess sighed before speaking, her breath like a light, gentle wind. She then stated that from that moment on, Kong San would have to go through many trials to pay off the ceramic debt from his past life. Her voice was so loud that you wanted to cover your ears. Her voice was deafening. Kong San heard the goddess and asked what she meant. He didn't understand what past life she was talking about, much less a debt from such a distant past. Asmuna jumped down and appeared right in front of Kong San. Dust rose up around her and small stones flew in all directions from her powerful landing. Kong San completely forgot that he should also be keeping an eye on the wolves and missed the moment when they got very close. One of them grabbed Kong San's shoulder with his paw. He glanced at Asmuna, but she only smiled faintly and asked him not to make a mistake in his choice. Another tank tried to hold back the monster's onslaught. He held it by the mouth, trying to push the monster away from him. He understood that his strength was running out and soon the beast would win. He did not understand at what point everything went wrong. Kim Chung-sik turned 30 this year. He grew up in such terrible conditions that you can only see in movies. His father was an alcoholic. He also had problems with aggression. His mother could not stand such a life and left home when Kim Chung-sik was still a child. Soon the boy's father died in an accident, leaving his son in the care of his grandmother. Before the world changed, Kim Chung-sik was an ordinary man. He grew up and lived an ordinary life with his grandmother and was generally no different from other ordinary people. He was far from the hunters, but still a turning point had come in his life. He remembered the doctor's words as if it had happened just recently. The conversation was about treatment and a sum of at least 300 million won. Kim Chung-sik's grandmother has fallen ill with a very rare disease. Kim Chung-sik had no way to earn that much money and needed a way to make a fortune quickly, even at the cost of his own life. So he became a hunter. At 20, he had already failed the assessment of his abilities. This meant that he had no innate talent, but hunters always knew how to surprise. He was ready to do anything for his family. Kim Chung-sik became a hunter only 6 months ago, and then lying under the onslaught of the beast and feeling its deadly breath, he thought that he should have guessed that this could happen. He made a terribly stupid mistake by allowing greed to win over common sense. It was clear from the start that the mage was not to be trusted. He understood that it was in vain to dream of help, and in the place of the magician he would most likely have run away too. He tried to fight the beast until the very last moment, thinking about his grandmother and how she would not be able to overcome the disease without him. He also could not imagine how hard it would be for her to learn of his death. The only chance was to defeat this beast and try to change your life for the better and continue to be wary of such dangers. Well, when he was completely desperate, something incredible happened. The beast released its grip and moved its paw to the side, which greatly surprised Kim Chung-sik. The beast froze for a moment and began to fall. Kim Chung-sik quickly noticed that someone had plunged a dagger straight into the beast's head and saved its life. He lay there and couldn't even move from fear and all the emotions he had experienced. He tried to catch his breath and believe that he was still alive. Kong Sen learned something very important some time ago, but he had to go through a lot. He looked at the bloody claw of the beast in front of him and did not immediately understand what had happened. The beast managed to sneak up on him unnoticed and pierced the young man through and through. Goddess Asmuna smiled at him again, telling him that in his past life he was a bloody demon. The goddess came closer to him and touched the claw of the beast that pierced Kong San with her index finger. For the young man, everything seemed like complete madness. The goddess carefully touched the end of the claw, slightly staining her finger with blood. She continued to speak and explain to Kong San that his life was full of suffering because of his past life. After she touched the beast, real magic began to happen. The beast roared loudly, so loudly that it seemed he felt incredibly strong pain. The beast began to retreat, removing its claw from Kong San's flesh and leaving huge holes in his body. Well, as soon as the claw left his body, they immediately disappeared. Everything looked like a fool, even the clothes became whole again. Kong Sen looked at the goddess with suspicion, and not trusting her words, asked again who he was in his past life. Her voice became sharp and she repeated that the young man was a bloody demon. The goddess smiled and, crossing her arms over her chest, repeated this again. Kong Sen didn't understand what she was talking about and asked her to explain who the blood demon was and stated that he considered it nonsense. Asmuna smiled again and said that the young man may not believe her, but he must know that if he does not pay his karmic debt, he will not see happiness in this life, and only by passing the test and paying off the debt will he lighten the weight of his sins. She said that the reward for successfully passing the test depended on the difficulty and asked him to accept it because it was fair, and having gotten rid of the karmic debt and having overcome difficulties and suffered, he would be able to live the life he deserved. Without waiting for Kong San's answer, the goddess, taking on a rather mad look, shouted that it was time to begin and noted that he had been granted a trial by adversity. Kong San should have helped F-rank hunter Kim Chung-sik escape from the other world with him. This was something Kong San certainly did not expect and was clearly unhappy with what he heard. He was confused and didn't even know how to react to such information. He started shouting at the goddess to stop talking nonsense because they were two living shields and would not be able to cope with such beasts. The goddess interrupted him by showing a hologram on her palm. Without saying anything more to the guy, Asmuna pointed to her palm and declared that this would be his reward. Kong-san didn't really have any other option, and he had to save Kim Chun-sik from the clutches of the monster. Kong-san ran straight towards those wolves, thinking that he was on the verge of death anyway, but now he had a chance to change something. The monsters were ready for this fight. They could have already torn everyone apart if not for the presence of the goddess who did not allow them to do so. The wolves gripped their clubs tighter and prepared for battle. As he approached the monsters, Kong-san opened the spell bottle. He cast this spell on his sword because it was the magic that increased its power. The monsters also ran towards Kong-san and roared loudly. Kong-san knew that he had no choice but to defeat these monsters, but still something inside him screamed in fear. The opponents were really very strong. At the first blow, Kong-san slid along the ground. The beast's onslaught was very strong. The next blow was much more successful than the first. A loud crack of the sword blade was heard. Kong-san lost his balance slightly, but he also managed to give the same effect to his opponent. Kong-san immediately stood up and ran in the opposite direction from the beast, so as not to run into its club. He moved on to the next beast, deciding that it was worth trying to deal with it right away. He deftly dodged the wolf's blow, taking aim at the same time. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly with both hands. As the beast leapt at him, he slid right underneath it, holding his sword up. He ripped the monster apart, causing it irreparable damage and leaving wounds that would not leave the monsters alive. Kong-san also stood up and jumped on that wolf again. Taking a running start, Kong-san jumped and stabbed his sword into the monster, taking away the monster's life force. The beast fell to the ground but again growled angrily. It seemed that it could rise again and rush into battle. Kong-san may have merged. I wish that this monster would die quickly. Kong-san jumped again, stabbing his sword once more. This blow was decisive and took the life of the beast. The beast tried to strike back with its claws, but it was too late and the force quickly left it. The wolf gave his last cry, which was filled with pain, after which the monster fell dead in the winter. Kong-san froze for a moment, trying to make sure that the wolf was really dead. After carefully examining the monster, Kong-san realized that one was ready, and all that was left was to deal with the second. Without wasting time, he immediately ran to the next one and hit him in the face with his fist. But the wolf didn't react to this blow. Kong-san cursed to himself, but of course he wasn't going to give up. He realized that less remained in the fiery body of the dead monster, which caused some problems. When the goddess spoke of his duty, she warned him that trials and tribulations would always make him risk his life, and he should not forget that. He had a small dagger with him which could also be used against such a huge beast, but it might not work. Well, he had no other choice. And she wriggled out and took from the wolf, did not jump up and swung the knife. He was focused only on his victory, and all he saw were his hands. After the blow, blood spurted out in all directions and stained Kong-san's hand. The monster roared loudly in anger and pain. Kong-san quickly jumped behind him to deliver another blow. With both hands, he grabbed the dagger's handle and plunged the blade into the beast's back. This was another very deep and serious wound. The second beast also fell at the hands of Kong-san, who Lael did not even hope to win in that situation. He was breathing heavily. He couldn't believe that he had actually managed to win. It didn't fit in his head. He rolled to the ground. Next to him was making the same dagger, and his hand immediately reached for it. Grabbing the dagger, he jumped up and ran towards his last opponent. First, he needed to take his sword, but he needed to do it as quickly as possible. He pulled the sword from the beast, and now it was worth making another jerk, putting in more effort. He didn't look around but saw only the monster, who was alive but had to die, and only at his hands. He ran as fast as he could. Kong-san ran towards his dream, grasping the chance given to him by the goddess herself. He swooped in like a hurricane and struck the wolf, who was still fighting with Kim Chung-sik. The beast flew away and fell to the ground. This meant that Kong-san had passed the test. But Kong-san was completely exhausted. Sweat was pouring down his face, and his face was completely pale. He fell to the ground, spreading his arms out to the sides and closing his eyes tightly. Kong-san lost consciousness for a while. He began to come to his senses from the fact that someone was hitting him in the face and screaming. Reluctantly, Kong-san opened one eye and looked at what was happening. The goddess Asmuna was sitting right on top of him and was ready to hit Kong-san with all her might to bring him to his senses. From the blow, Kong-san immediately jumped up and screamed that he had already woken up, clutching his head. The goddess, with an imperturbable face, handed him a piece of paper, noting that this was his promised reward. Kong-san did not understand what he received and noted that it was just paper, to which the goddess was indignant and noted that she had specially printed it for him, and he could at least thank him. She looked displeased. As Muna looked at Kong-san and said nothing more while he looked at the paper. Kong-san looked at the hologram that appeared in front of him, looked at the goddess. I want at least some explanation. As Muna grimaced and noted out loud how much the world had changed. She turned to the young man and said that he still had many trials ahead of him, but he had dealt with all the monsters, so he was entitled to a reward, and asked him not to rush to lose consciousness next time. The goddess smiled and waved goodbye. Kong-san began to examine his gift. He couldn't believe that he actually received this as his reward. He looked at the characteristics and was completely shocked. He gained the skill of a recovery aura, which allowed the user to sacrifice their own health to restore the health of allies. He also received the skill of the will of the defender, which made it possible to instantly restore health and double the defense if the health level fell below 10%. Most hunters only had 1-star skills. Only D-rank hunters and above could obtain 2-star skills, and to obtain 3 stars not only ability but also incredible luck were needed. Kong-sen jumped for joy on the spot. I understand that for such a reward he risked not in vain. He could not even fully believe what happened to him. Well, his joy passed very quickly because he remembered what else the goddess had said. He was very excited by the words that he still had many trials ahead of him. He tried to remember if she had said anything else and to make sure he hadn't mixed anything up. He remembered that he still had to help another F-rank hunter Kim Chun-sik escape from the other world with him. Kong-san immediately rushed to your comrade and began to shake him. He apologized for being a little distracted and was afraid that Kim Chun-sik might have died. Kong-sen saw that his comrade was losing too much blood due to the wounds he received. He knew that if the bleeding wasn't stopped he would die before they reached the hospital. He tried to figure out what to do in such a situation, how to prevent the death of his comrade. It was now time to use the newly acquired skills, and he used the aura of recovery. Now it became clear to him why the goddess had given him such a skill. He glanced at his comrade and noted to himself that he was just as lucky. Kong-san began treating Kim Chung-sik, hoping that this will help stop the bleeding and save his life. The wounds actually began to heal right before Kong-san's eyes. Both deep severe wounds and small scratches immediately began to disappear from Kim Chun-sik's body. Kong-san didn't stop and continued to do everything he could to help his teammate. Events continued to develop in the Hunters Management Bureau. The young man walked carefully and slowly down the corridor towards the right office. He didn't understand why he was called for something like that. He slammed the door to the office louder than usual. As soon as he saw those who had called him, he asked why he had been called and asked to sort it out as quickly as possible. The manager looked at him with a very slight dislike and did not give any answer. They checked to see if he was Mr. Moon Sung-min. Behind these managers, the guy noticed a familiar face. It was Kong-san. The manager said that he wanted to ask Mr. Arati, which took place a couple of days ago. Kong-san smiled slightly, looking into the eyes of the magician who betrayed him. Moon Sung-min saw Kong-san and understood what the conversation would be about and immediately began to fuss. Mr. Moon Sung-min was invited to sit down. It was clear that the conversation would be quite long. But Moon Sung-min immediately realized that the best solution for him was to run away and immediately grabbed the handle of the front door. The managers immediately jumped up, shouting that he should have been detained. Moon Sung-min rushed out of the office as quickly as possible and ran down the corridor. But he couldn't escape. He suddenly felt a push in his back. He was knocked down and pinned half-tight, not allowing him to escape. The manager reminded him that he had escaped during the raid, abandoning his comrades. He was reminded that intending to endanger the lives of his comrades in another world was a serious crime. Moon Sung-min became indignant and asked if they had any evidence that he did it intentionally and began to convince them that he retreated because he could not win that battle. The manager didn't argue, and it was clear that Moon Sung-min's words were open to doubt. They explained to him that there was a video recording that confirmed his crime. The manager said that for 2 F-rank tanks and a mage 4 bens was a piece of cake. They also told him that as soon as his spells didn't work, he immediately ran away. The court definitely needed just this one recording to find him guilty. Moon Sung-min knew he was in deep trouble. He could not understand who and why could have recorded this because he thought that his crime would really be hidden from everyone's eyes. Kong-sen watched silently from the side as Moon Sung-min was taken into custody, and then as he tried to break free and begged for a different solution. When the magician was tied up, one of the managers approached Kong-san. The manager said that thanks to the video recording, this case will be closed quickly, and we note that the situation was unpleasant and thanked Kong-san for being prepared. They received many requests for attempted murders in another world, but it was extremely difficult to prove so many left empty-handed. Kong Sen said that this was why he always wrote everything down just in case. Previously, he regretted spending so much money on the security cameras that were attached to his belt, but now it was an absolutely justified purchase. If during their stay in another world someone decided to kill someone, then that person could not actually prevent it. Therefore, almost all hunters scrupulously found out everything about the members of their future team and spent a lot of effort on preparation. When Moon Sungmin missed, he immediately became confused, and being sure that the monster would deal with him, he left his team. He didn't feel any remorse. That was the whole job of a human shield. Moon Sungmin had to die for him because he paid for it. Besides, the people in that world didn't care about the deaths of others. The manager stated that when she watched the recording she noticed that Kong San was stronger than a normal F-rank tank and asked him why he was doing such work. She told him that he could get a special weapon to fight monsters in the army. It would make his life easier. Kong San replied that the weapon was not very effective for fighting stronger monsters. He looked at the manager and firmly stated that he was often unlucky in life, so in such a dangerous world, he did not want to rely on luck. He would like to become a strong hunter relying only on his own strength. When Moon Sungmin's arrest was successful, Kong San relaxed. He hoped that this bastard would rot in prison for at least 10 years. A friend behind him, he heard footsteps that were approaching him. The man who approached him looked worried. His genitals were slightly open, and in the corner you could see a bandage covering the wound. The sight of this man and the fact that he immediately asked his name looking specifically for a person named Kong San alarmed the young man even more. When the young man heard that he had found the one he was looking for, he immediately fell to his knees. He began to bow before Kong San, calling him his savior. Just a few days before this meeting, Kim Chung-sik came to his senses after that fight with the monsters in one of the hospitals. He jumped up in bed as if he had had a very bad dream. Well, when I realized that I was still alive, I was very surprised. He was all bandaged, his whole body hurt, but he was alive. He tried to remember what had happened, and images from that fight flashed before his eyes. He remembered how someone had killed the monster that was about to kill him. At that moment he could hardly see his savior because I was very far away and turned to the side. He managed to mentally thank his savior even more, but he quickly lost consciousness and did not wait for him to come closer. He was so scared and exhausted you could only watch the young man who helped him fight for his life. Before he lost consciousness, he only managed to catch a glimpse of Kong San's face and was able to remember the general outline. When Kim Chung-sik came to his senses, he tried to reconstruct all the events of that day and remembered that the magician of their team had escaped, and this promised only death. Kim Chung-sik was perplexed by the fact that the young man was able to save him and did not understand how he managed to do it. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling his name, and he had to turn towards the door. One of the nurses rolled in a wheelchair with Kim Chung-sik's grandmother sitting on it. She started scolding him right from the doorway. She scolded him for agreeing to such a dangerous job and apparently wanted to go to the grave with him. The grandmother indignantly shouted that she was already very old. Well, it was too early for her grandson to leave this world. Kim Chung-sik ran up to her and knelt down and tried to calm the old lady down, noting that she shouldn't worry about her high blood pressure. He tried to point out that he was alive and well, but she just kept saying that he looked like a skeleton and wasn't okay. Kim Chung-sik said that he managed to survive and that everything was fine. Tears were unfolding in his eyes. Grandma brushed a couple of rubber bands off his cheek and said that she could have been destined to die at that age, but it was too early for him. Kim Chung-sik recalled some events from his early childhood and told his grandmother that he wanted to live with her for a very long time. He remembered holding a man's hand. His grandmother appeared from where and practically ran to him. She ran up to us, grabbed the boy in her arms, and hugged him, offering to live a long, happy life together. Well, at that time, he didn't understand what was happening at all. Grandmother repeated these words to him again and tenderly kissed him on the forehead, holding back her tears. Kim Chung-sik hugged the old woman tighter, and they sat like that for some time, crying into each other's shoulders. They had no one else, and they were incredibly worried about each other. And then Kim Chung-sik, having met his savior, did not calm down and generously thanked him for the chance he had been given to continue his life. Kong San tried to lift Kim Chung-sik to his feet. I note that he did only what he had to, and in another world you can only rely on your team. And if he had left him there, he would have definitely died. He would not have been able to bear the burden of such guilt. Kim Chung-sik cried a lot. I don't believe that people like Kong-sen really exist. Kong-sen knelt down next to him and told him that he hesitated that day because he was terribly scared, but in reality he is not the hero they think he is. Kong-sen rolled his eyes and asked Kim Chung-sik not to look at him like that since he hadn't done anything outstanding. Kong-sen knew that he couldn't tell this young man that he only had a mission to save his life and that it wasn't done out of any kind of conscience. Kong-sen thought that they would never see each other again anyway, and it was not worth accepting such gratitude and opening up even more. He immediately turned around and said goodbye, but Kim Chung-sik stopped him and asked to let him pay for the rescue. This proposal made Kim Chung-sik feel a little uneasy, and he assured that everything was fine and that such thanks were not worth giving. And at that moment Kong-san was given a second trial of adversity. It was very sudden, more so than when the goddess Asmuna appeared before him for the first time. Kim Jun-sik's grandmother suffered from a rare disease. Their family could not afford the necessary surgery, and in order to complete the new challenge, Kong-sang had to donate 150 million won for her surgery. He looked at Kim Chun-sik and thought to himself that he still didn't understand why all this was given to him. There was no other option, and it was necessary to donate such a huge amount of money for the operation of Kim Chung-sik's grandmother. The quality reward was added to the strength and holiness by 2 points and also given 1 skill star. Kong-san took out his phone and opened his account information. He had 168 million won in his account. He bought this money since childhood. I have been working hard at grueling jobs. Donating it for my grandmother's operation was a good thing, but it was too hard morally. This was his entire fortune, and he had no more money anywhere. He understood that if he transferred this money, he would be left penniless. This decision was very difficult for him, and he looked at the screen of his phone and the amount in his account for a long time. He remembered the words of the goddess Asmuna, who told him to get rid of his karmic debt by overcoming difficulties, and only in this case he would be able to live the life he deserved. They explained to him that once he had set foot on the path of holiness, he could not go back. Refusal to complete the task would entail the forced return of all the rewards received, and the karmic debt would increase. He would not only die a meaningless death, but he could even become a vegetable, unable to commit suicide for all eternity. He remembered these words and thought that by agreeing he would lose the ability to choose what to do. The reward for such a sacrifice was holy points and a skill star. There was nothing else written there, so that was his entire reward. What was even worse was that if he did not complete this task, he would lose the opportunity to receive a new one later. He thought for a long time. He knew that the hunter's strength guaranteed them incredible wealth. If he became a strong hunter, he would be able to quickly return those 150 million won, but the market was not available to him because he lived on an F-rank account. Getting a new skill for 150 million won wasn't that bad. Kong-sen tried to convince himself and find a benefit, and eventually realized that he could still get his reward and do even more. He exhaled and plucked up his courage, took his phone in his hands again, and began to dial the number. He asked to be connected to the administrator. The money was transferred and the reward for completing the test was credited. A man appeared in the corridor and asked candidates numbered 31 to 40 to follow him. All those who had suitable numbers followed the young man, and soon they were led into a large hall where another man was already waiting for them. He kept his hands behind his back and explained that they were going through a basic aptitude test, and once they were in their personal virtual training room, they would be able to control a basic avatar in the simulation. The man stressed that their goal was to successfully complete the mission according to the role and rank they received, and added that complaints about the avatar were not accepted. The man then went on to say that if their skills were up to par, the avatar would adjust to them so that they could complete the mission. If they failed the test, it didn't mean the problem was with the avatar, but that they lacked the necessary abilities. Kong-san was candidate number 38. He applied for the role of a tank. His mission in this trial was to hold off 4 monsters while protecting his teammates. He only had 5 minutes left before the fight began. Upon request, he was given basic equipment in the form of a sword and a bill, and was also given a warning that his character's parameters could not exceed 30 units. He was ready to take on the test. He saw a much higher goal before him than simply passing the test with flying colors. 4 monsters appeared before him. They were the same as on that raid the goddess Asmuna could have appeared to him. For successfully completing the test, he would receive an increase in his combat parameters by as much as 2 units. He went through the whole thing only to have his parameters exceed the 10-point mark. Now Kong-san has finally reached the 30-point mark. He also got a new 1-star skill called Guardian Shield, which was a basic tank skill. It seemed to him that he would be able to test the new awards in practice, and he was really looking forward to this opportunity. Kong-san was very serious about the upcoming fight and was waiting for the signal to begin the test. As soon as the signal was given, the monster wolves rushed at him, clicking their sharp fangs. He dealt with the first wolf very quickly. Just one blow was enough for the beast to fly off to the side, whining. Following him was a larger beast and a little more dodgy than the first. But Kong-san didn't even think about being very careful and immediately rushed after the next monster. Right in front of his face flashed a huge paw of a monster that could easily tear him into small pieces. The beast was very surprised when he discovered that his blow had no effect and did not even leave a scratch on Kong-san. This made him very angry, and after looking around and noticing Kong-san, he immediately headed towards him. Kong-san rushed at the sphere and dealt him a fairly powerful blow. The wolf-like monster immediately set off after its fellow. Kong-san was very attentive and did not take his eyes off those who remained. He immediately entered into a fight with the next beast. He noted for himself that the given parameters of this avatar were 30 units. This value was higher than the skills he actually possessed, and therefore here he reacted and thought faster. In other words, he finally had a chance to win. Those who were training new fighters watched Kong-san closely. The girl noted that Kong-san was well versed in what was happening for a human shield of rank F, and of all the candidates that day, he was the most capable so far. If there really was someone with such skills, then it gave a chance to all of humanity. The commander did not show any emotion on his face and silently watched Kong-san with a serious face. He didn't talk about his observations or anything else, being completely focused on the fighter. Kong-san was really good at teaching and had great hopes. Even against such strong opponents, Kong-san was able to hold his own while maintaining his dignity. But suddenly the beast he was fighting with simply stopped noticing him, and with one blow jumped over him and ran towards those who were behind. Another beast followed him, and Kong-san was already waiting for him with his sword blade extended, hoping to at least deal with it. The girl saw this and swore softly, and we note that one of the gnolls decided to switch to Kong-san's comrade. The purpose of the test was to assess how well the candidate matched the role he wanted to take, and in his case he should never forget that he had a comrade behind him. The girl was surprised that the candidate apparently did not notice this. Approaching Kong-san's hologram comrades. If this was a real fight, these people would be in great danger. Kong-san used the Guardian Shield at that moment and blocked the path of some of the beasts. At first it might seem like he was simply failing the tests due to his own inattention, but that was not the case. One of the wolves, having received a blow, fell to the ground and growled loudly, looking towards Kong-san. He immediately jumped on this animal from behind. At that moment it seemed like Kong-san had eyes right on the back of his head, because when the beast jumped on him, the young man pulled his sword behind his back to prevent the monster from attacking. The girl was very surprised by this, but the commander stood there with the same expression on his face as he had throughout the rest of the battle. The skills of a defender changed their function depending on the role the person occupied. This happened to Kong-san. They did not help to redirect the enemy's aggression. By helping him get rid of his ceramic debt, Asmuna forced him to take the path of self-sacrifice and dedication, the path of true self-denial. The tank's job was to stand at the front line, covering its partners with it. If something went wrong, the tank was the first to die. The work there was risky, so tanks were always needed. If you prove your abilities in this role, you could become rich. Once upon a time, many dreamed of becoming tanks, but due to the increased danger, this profession began to be avoided most often. The risk was very high, but the reward was proportionate. Kong-san thought that this role was perfect for him. It helped him work off his karmic debt and also earn money. He wasn't going to put his life on the line for a couple of measly pieces of paper, and this role suited him best. Soon he finished off the last beast and his tests were completed. He really hoped that his science would be appreciated as it should be, and that he would get what he came for. He believed that the main thing was to get promoted, since with his current rank, he could not participate in more difficult raids. In order to become stronger, he had to at least get rid of the label of a human shield of rank F. When he returned to the hall, he saw that people were staring at the screen behind him. In general, they could not even notice that he had returned. Kang Sen saw this and turned around himself. His score appeared on the screen in the training room. After completing the tests for each of the potential fighters, an excused bell rang indicating that everyone was free to go. Everyone walked out of the training hall together. Each of them already knew their future. Everyone left the hall silently. Some were pleased with themselves while others showed signs of nervousness, which could mean they had failed the tests. After the tests, the questionnaires of each candidate were carefully checked and the best were chosen. The man sorting through the sheets of paper with the fighter's characteristics swore, noting that all this was pathetic. He was outraged that these fighters couldn't even pass the most basic testing, and what were they thinking when they applied for a rank increase? He was angry that these people didn't understand that their abilities were limited. Real combat was not a game at all. It seemed that these fighters could not even imagine what might await them in future raids. One of the questionnaires did captivate the man, and he stopped at it, looking at the description for several minutes. In his hands, he held the questionnaire of candidate Kang Sen, who had rank C. The questionnaire said that the candidate had shown himself to be an ideal tank and had lasted all 5 minutes without missing a single hit. He focused entirely on protecting his comrades, redirecting the monster's aggression towards himself, and the basic aptitude test was passed with the highest score. He was so carried away that when his office was knocked on and they entered, he jumped up and down. They let him know that his time for testing had come. The candidates were told that all participants would be divided into groups of 5 people, and that these groups would have to take part in a combat test. First we would test them, they would end up in a rank E zone, and in order to successfully pass it they would have to at least get rid of all the monsters in the zone. Among those who managed to do this, only those candidates who prove themselves to be sufficiently competent hunters at rank E will receive credit. Each candidate was allocated a separate zone, which meant that they knew nothing about their teammates. It was very important for the hunters to be able to assemble a team correctly. It was noted that the test would begin when the teams were formed, and to simplify the process, the coaches randomly selected 2 captains. The leader of the first team was Min Hyunmo. The leader of the second team was Cho Hanbyul. The boys decided which of them would be the first to choose a person for their team using a game of rock, paper, scissors. Min Hyunmo was able to choose a member for his team first. Cho Hanbyul was very upset about this and grabbed his head. Min Hyunmo smiled slightly. I looked at all the candidates and decided to start with the one I needed first. Naturally, the tank was chosen first. A reliable line of defense and greatly simplified the raid. Few wanted to be in this role and many were tense. Min Hyunmo pointed to one of the guys and noted that if the rest of them could hold their own, then this young man would be suitable for them. Each of the leaders took turns choosing one person to join their team, and now it was Cho Hanbel's turn. Only 2 candidates acted as tanks, there only one remained. That tank was Kang Sen. He was waiting for him to be chosen and for the test to begin sooner. But many were surprised that he was the tank. He was considered too thin for the role and generally physically unsuitable. Cho Hanbyul wasn't happy that he got Kang Sen, but he decided that it was impossible to raid without any protection, and so Kang Sen would do. Cho Hanbyul thought that maybe this young man could at least pretend to do something. After the leaders had chosen their team, the head coach made an address. He gave instructions and asked them to remember that in a real fight no one would protect them. This was a test where even a small mistake could cost them their lives. The candidates were given half an hour to think about their strategy for the fight. The trainer noted that they could do it in 30 minutes and decided to leave the room for that time. One of the girls from Min Hyunmo's team pointed out that their team had a good tank and praised the leader. Min Hyunmo smiled and assured the warriors that everything would go well if everyone followed their roles and did not forget the rules and standards of combat. He offered to share what each person's specialization was. In the team of the leader Cho Hanbyul, everyone was very frowning and looked askance at Kang Sen, reading that he can't do anything. Kang Sen changed his clothes and asked if they were going to come up with some kind of plan for the fight. The leader waved his hands and said that they will do this, this is very important. It was obvious that he was very worried and angry as well. The coach meanwhile stepped aside. He couldn't hear what exactly the candidates were talking about, but he could watch them for a bit. He kept his eyes on the highly rated candidate Kang Sen. His awakening results were the worst, and he had been working as a human shield of rank F for several years. The coach decided that this young man knew the basics but did not shine with talent. He believed that the guy had amazing abilities, but at the same time he had no talent at all, which was a big failure. Half an hour flew by very quickly and the first test began, and the team was invited to the battlefield. Min Hyunmo's team came out first. All the team members looked quite confident and thought that victory would be theirs. They had a very strong tank that they were counting on. Suddenly they heard a loud cry warning them of danger. He was the first to take the monster's attacks, blocking them with his shield. The battle began immediately. The tank of this team was really very strong and reacted well. Min Hyunmo ordered his entire team to line up as they had agreed earlier. Min Henmo's team was unlucky to encounter the orcs. They were very aggressive and also strong opponents. The tank used the iron body skill and took all the damage. This skill temporarily increased defense by 5%. Min Hyunmo noted to himself that there were only 3 orcs and asked Lee Kori of his team to maintain the tank's health and give him strength. I'm sure they can handle it. Healer, I was busy maintaining the tank's health and everyone else had to rush into battle. Well, the arrows fired by the orcs were easily repelled by the iron arm guards of these monsters. Min Henmo ran towards the orcs swinging his sword. Well focused on his target. He managed to land a blow and the orc stumbled back trying to keep his balance. Min Henmo froze for a moment, sensing that there was another orc standing behind him. He immediately turned around and took up the fight with him too. Another orc immediately appeared behind him, wanting to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to attack from behind. The orc growled and clutched his club tighter, beginning to advance on the leader of the first team, Min Henmo. The tank of this team held up well, but its task was to take all the serious blows. He used the Guardian Shield skill to attract the monster's attention. The orc immediately felt this and, succumbing to the spell, turned around and ran towards the tank. Stopping nearby, the orc swung his axe with a half-turn of his torso, which made the blow powerful. He struck with one jerk, but his goods got stuck in the tank's shield, which had managed to put it out and block the blow. It turned out to be harder than the tank itself had expected. He was very surprised by the force of the blow, but he had to hold on. Following this orc, another one followed, running at full speed towards the young man, also swinging his heavy weapon. The tank held on with great difficulty but did not retreat, gathering all its strength. Min Henmo noted to himself that it was apparently very difficult for his tank, but he thought that he should cope since he was supported by 2 healers. One of the pages was an archer and kept shooting arrow after arrow. Her target and that of her leader were the same monster. Everything was going according to the plan they had made before the test began. Right in front of Min Henmo's face, the orc's teeth clicked loudly. Everything that happened left Min Hyunmo in a kind of stupor for a short moment. This was one of the largest orcs that was in this trial. It seemed that this monster could crush anyone with its powerful leg. When Min Henmo looked behind this orc, he saw that almost an entire army of his kin was running towards him. The orcs ran straight towards the team with a battle cry. Min Henmo, having counted the orcs, discovered that there were about 8 of them and assumed that the first 3 were just reconnaissance. We had to rush into battle immediately. Min Henmo got ahead of the orc and struck him first. Immediately after this blow, he turned around and ran away, shouting to his team that they should retreat and gather behind the tank. Meanwhile, their team's tank was carrying out its specific task and taking on all the enemies. Even with the score, it was very difficult to put up a fight against such a horde. The team shouted at Chansu, begging him to hold on because he couldn't retreat or it would be the end for everyone. A drone was circling in the sky, filming everything that was happening in order to transmit it to the commander and trainers. He followed the team everywhere and recorded every detail of the battle or any other adventure. The man carefully studied the fighting technique of each team member and also their ability to react to such surprises. You could tell his displeasure from his expression. Many candidates were missing something. The government didn't create hunter ranks to maintain their self-esteem. The ranks guaranteed a certain level of skill. A hunter of a certain rank could be entrusted with a corresponding task. In other words, an E-rank hunter should be able to handle an E-rank raid. This team's tank Chansu was completely unable to cope with his task and was much weaker than his opponents. This was to be expected. If he could handle so many orcs on his own, he wouldn't have stayed with the rest of the team for long and would have passed the test for the next rank. In order to pass the combat test, it was not enough for just one member of the party to be a skilled hunter. The entire team had to meet the rank standard. If this correspondence was not there, then the entire team risked paying with their lives and not returning from the raid. Min Henmo knew that the examiner was right, and if they lost their tank, they would all die. He ordered the healers to support Chansu with all their might, and while the orcs were focused on the front lines, it was worth attacking them from behind. They set about carrying out these commands. It was worth doing everything possible to return alive. Chansu tried to hold on with all his might, understanding what responsibility lay on him. All the others followed their leader and tried to approach the orcs from behind. Eventually, the orcs noticed that their opponent's team had decided to cheat. The doctors did not move from their place and directed all their efforts to supporting Chansu. Chansu also became like a stone. Without moving, he looked only in front of himself, trying to endure everything. In the end, the team managed to successfully clear the E-rank zone and returned back to the training camp. The tank came out first. It was covered in its own blood. As soon as he found himself in the hall, he immediately fell to the floor. He had absolutely no strength left, and he also received a lot of injuries. Kong San and his teammate watched this with a grimace. The scene was terrifying, and they could imagine what awaited them in such a raid. Doctors with a stretcher immediately rushed to Chansu. The whole team was very tired. The examiner addressed the book on the microphone and asked to move to the waiting area. Meanwhile, doctors took Jiangsu on a stretcher to the hospital. After this, the examiner invited the second team to begin the test. Cho Hambyul was very worried about whether he and his team would be okay when they returned. But he had no choice, and his entire team followed the portal to the raid. The leader went first. Cho Hambyul tried to keep all his worries very deep and not let them affect the situation. When he stepped onto the ground, he found himself in deep mud. He thought about what kind of monsters his team would encounter in this place. He thought that his tank was weaker than the first team's tank and assumed that he would have to take on a lot. Following the leader, other team members appeared. They all stood with their backs to each other so as not to miss the danger. Kong San was very serious. He knew that the team leader thought he was weak, but he wanted to show him otherwise. Very quickly, they encountered the first monster. Cho Hanbel exhaled and pressed his lips tightly together, preparing himself for a very tough battle. He shouted to everyone else that they had been spotted by the enemy and commanded them to take up positions. These creatures were very similar to the orcs that attacked the previous team, but they were an order of magnitude smaller and faster. They were goblins, and the team leader let everyone else know about it. Immediately, something began to happen that they had not expected. The mud began to suck them in. They ended up in a swamp. If they hadn't done anything, they would have simply drowned there. No one could contain their emotions, and everyone was loudly cursing and outraged by what was happening. Going on a raid, the team usually knew in advance what territory they would be fighting on. Again, during the test, the candidates did not receive any information. Part of the assessment also depended on the ability to quickly adapt to the circumstances. That is why many people were very worried before the test, because they were faced with absolute uncertainty. The goblins were advancing very quickly, and the team had to retreat back. Goblins were very agile and vicious creatures. Their cruel thirst for bloodshed made them powerful killers. These were some of the most unpleasant monsters that could be encountered in the altered world in general. Kong San, surprisingly for everyone, did not show any emotions similar to fear or confusion. He was collected and focused. He had the opportunity to achieve something more in his new profession, and also to wipe the noses of those who did not believe in him and laughed. Most of the goblins were focused on him and were carefully sneaking up on him through the mud. Kong San turned to his team and asked them to calm down, noting that everyone should act according to the situation. He assured that they were just goblins and there was nothing scary about them. These words surprised Cho Hanbyul and the other participants. Two goblins immediately rushed at Kong San, holding sharp swords in their paws. Kong San didn't move from his place and waited for those creatures to come closer to him. One of the goblins held a bow in his hands and, moving a little closer, released a siren at Kong San. Kong San noted to himself that the goblins were coordinating their attack plan and were acting purely according to their roles. This meant that they had a chief, a hobgoblin, who commanded everyone. Overall, this information didn't give Kong San anything, since he himself knew what to do. He activated the will of the protector as soon as the goblins got close to him. The skill increased the restoration of defense and health by 12% for each enemy, depending on the number of enemies. When there were many opponents, using this skill was very effective. Even against a huge crowd, thanks to such skill, it was possible to stand firm and win. The examiner watched Kong San's fighting technique and skills with surprise. Kong San's teammates were also amazed at what their tank was capable of, since from the outside it was impossible to tell that it was strong. When Cho Hanbel realized that they had every chance, he ordered all the other participants to rush to attack. The team members rushed at the goblins without thinking about anything else. Their goal was only to win, and now it was less scary knowing the strength of the tank. Kong San's team also had an archer like the goblin team. One arrow fired at a goblin knocked him far from the battlefield. Depending on the number of enemies, the restoration of defense and health was reduced by 1%. The skill changed slightly. Kong San learned about this already in this fight and found it to be a very interesting skill. Well, it didn't distract him one bit from what was happening during the fight. He wasn't distracted by anything else at all. Well, suddenly he heard a rustling in the bushes nearby which really bothered him. Hearing this, he paused for a moment and tried to understand what it could be. He shouted to his entire team to run away from these bushes. Most likely the team didn't even imagine what could come out of there. When they saw what was happening, they were amazed and could not believe their eyes. A bloody orc came out of the forest. It was surprising that it appeared in an E-rank zone because it was much stronger. At this point, Kong San became very excited and taken aback. No one understood where a bloody orc could have appeared from during this raid. The teams noted that this monster was rank D and they were in the rank E zone. Everyone guessed that something was wrong. Cho Hanbel commanded the whole team to retreat. Vicha understood that they would not be able to cope together against the bloody orc. It was a very strong opponent, and it was also huge in size. It was a big problem even for candidates of rank D. But Kong San didn't move from his spot. When he heard the leader's command to retreat, he saw that the goddess Asmuna was sitting on the shoulder of the bloody orc. This meant that he had to pass another test. Asmuna waved her hand lazily at him in greeting. Kong San got really angry. I can guess why he seized the goddess, and he didn't like it at all. The examiners were also shocked that such a monster could appear in the E-rank zone. The research group was immediately contacted with a request to explain what was happening. The man stated that it was impossible to conduct tests in the real habitat of the bloody orcs because it was madness. The research team responded that they had rechecked the area several times and everything was fine. They didn't notice any traces of these bloody orcs, although we didn't realize that if one of the candidates died during the test, it would bring too much trouble. They already had enough problems, and they did everything possible to prevent new ones from appearing. It was decided to terminate the test and bring the subjects back. Well, one of the examiners asked to take our time and observe the subjects a little in such circumstances. This angered the other examiner because if they didn't react in time and injured someone, it would have legal consequences for them. They were already under close media scrutiny after the recent deaths during the tests. The examiner calmly said that he understood all the concerns and reminded that his name was Kim Myung-min, and that this meant that he was a fool to make stupid decisions. Kim Myung-min explained that if the test subject was in danger, he would personally intervene and asked not to worry and give the candidate some time. The rest were unhappy with such demands and noted that it was precisely because of such actions that Kim Myung-min was kicked out, and now because of him innocent candidates could die again. The examiner adjusted his glasses and nevertheless agreed, noting that in that case Kim Myung-min would take full responsibility upon himself. The examiner did not want to get involved in this at all. Kim Myung-min did not respond to this but still agreed to such conditions. Asmuna explained that the third trial of adversity was more difficult than the previous ones because of Kong San's karma. All members of his team had to return alive. If someone were to die at the hands of the bloody orc, their death would be on his conscience. Kong San heard these words only in her head, which meant that no one else had seen or heard the goddess. Imagine, I continued and said that even the death of one person will burden his karma, and he must bring everyone back alive. He had already done something similar and even successfully, and the goddess noted that he will be able to do it again. Kansan wanted to object to this, but Asmuna interrupted him again. She just asked the guy to try hard and smiled. The new test was completely untimely because the enemy was really very strong and dangerous. Fighters many times stronger than Kong San could stand up to him, and even then some team members still died in such battles. There was no end there. But it was worth dealing with him alone and protecting your entire team from any damage. Kong San thought about how he barely got through to the E-rank test, and you didn't understand how he could deal with the bloody orc. This giant wasted no time and advanced. Kong San cursed Asmuna, suggesting that they wanted to kill him because of what he did in his past life. But still he had no other choice, and he shouted to all the other team members to prepare for the attack, and he himself would hold off the bloody orc. Kong San decided that he shouldn't have given up so quickly, and that he should at least try to complete this test. He blocked the path of the bloody orc, preparing for battle. Kong San focused only on this monster and gathered all his strength. He looked closely and saw that it was running straight towards him without even getting stuck in the mud. His steps were very heavy and the ground shook under his weight. He ran and swung his sword and struck, but Kong Sen managed to dodge it. This angered the bloody orc a little and he growled loudly. Kong Sen did everything he could to make as much time as possible for his comrades. He couldn't miss even one blow because it could kill him immediately. He had to be very agile, quick, and able to adapt to the situation. When he dodged another blow, he thought about how one swing of the bloody orc's hand was a strong wind, and not a single blow would have been enough to finish off any of the team. Cho Hanbyal was very tense and could barely control himself. He was ready to fight and took out one of the arrows from his quiver on his back. He shouted to his comrades that the tank was holding back the bloody orc, but they should also fight and help him. Some of the team listened to their leader and rushed to attack, but one of them retreated and looked at what was happening in bewilderment. He thought that all this was some kind of madness and that his comrades had gone crazy allowing him to fight against such a monster. He believed that their crazy tank was to blame for everything. If he hadn't run into the fight first, the examiners would have intervened long ago. He understood that no one would want to take responsibility if someone from the team died. He looked at the drone that was recording the video and decided for himself that he did not want to take any responsibility for the deaths of others. He was outraged that the administration was looking in the wrong direction. But Min Hyun-mo did exactly what he was supposed to do. I watched everyone's behavior, but I also noticed that one of them simply moved away. The rest of them were having quite a heated fight. Everyone was scared of what might happen, but most showed themselves to be very brave. Kong Sen led everyone else and showed by his own example how to accept danger. One by one, the goblins were defeated by Kong Sen, but the help of the team leader and the others was also very important. One of the girls also showed herself worthy and helped Kong Sen as they agreed. She, with the help of her skills and her magic, lifted a huge log and swung it. She cursed and the log flew straight at the orc. The girl didn't miss, and this attracted the attention of the bloody orc and also made him very angry. The monster roared in anger and headed towards the girl. But at that moment Cho Hanbel jumped out of nowhere and fired a bow. The bloody orc thought that he would soon take out two people at once. While the leader and one of his comrades distracted the monster, Kong Sen crept up on it unnoticed and plunged his sword into its leg. He gathered all his strength and squeezed the sword tightly through pinning the monster to the ground. Immediately several more arrows and a sword strike flew at the orc. The bloody orc growled loudly and did not start fighting back right away because the team attacked him from all sides and made him confused. He had been there a few times before, but it wasn't enough to end it. He broke off the ends of the arrows that stuck out of him so that they looked like small splinters. Kong Sen cursed in his mind, not satisfied with the situation. Bloody Organ was not only a D-rank monster but also had the berserker skill. The companions only saw the beast turn around and deal a huge blow. But it was not entirely clear whether it hit Kong Sen, who managed to avoid such a blow. Leader Cho Hanbel grimaced, suggesting that his tank might have died. Min Hyun-mo didn't show any signs of feeling any emotions and simply continued to wait silently. Kong Sen heard his name being shouted, fearing for his life. But he was unharmed even though he had taken a very powerful blow. But I came to my senses very quickly and was ready to continue the fight. But before he could do anything, the bloody organ had already run up to him and grabbed him, raising him above his head. One could only imagine what awaited Kong San in the next moment. The blood orc threw Kong San to the ground and was about to strike him from above with the handle of his axe. Kong San was already saying goodbye to his life because after such a blow he believed that he would definitely lose it. The administration jumped on the spot in anger and asked Min Hyun-mo to look at the screen and see what was happening there. He no longer knew what to do and waited for Min Hyun-mo to take at least some action. Kong Sen somehow managed to wound the blood orc in the leg. As quickly as possible, the young man jumped to the side and was now free again and could dodge the orc's next attacks. He immediately used the recovery aura, and thanks to it, he restored 23% of his health. His breathing was very heavy and constantly interrupted. He already had a lot of abrasions on his body that were bleeding. He thought that it was really hard to win against this bloody orc and thought about ending it all. Behind him he heard the screams of his comrades who were trying to make sure that he was okay. Turning to his team, he immediately threw away all the thoughts that had been creeping into his head before. He simply couldn't let the bloody orc advance any further or his team would not win. He believed that he and his team had to hold out until the very end. Kong Sen shouted to the team not to worry and continue fighting, and assured them that he could handle it himself. Min Henmo was expecting this. The man from the administration grabbed his head, not believing what he saw and heard. He was completely horrified and very worried about the consequences that would await the entire organization. The whole team listened to Kong San and continued to fight the small goblins, and quite successfully, judging by the corpses on the ground that were sucked into the mud. Having dealt with the goblins, they switched to the bloody orc, and each tried to lure the monster's attention to themselves, thus distracting him and buying time. Kong Sen noted that the monster was already starting to get tired, and they all needed to push a little more. The bloody organ was indeed already beginning to get exhausted, but he still had too much strength and power. It seemed as if he had been reborn, and having gained strength, he rushed forward towards the team. Kong Sen stepped back and covered himself with his shield. In 1 second, the bloody orc with his huge axe swung Kong Sen far to the side as if he were a small ant. This gave another of his companions the opportunity to land a good blow on the orc. The monster screamed loudly and his blood splattered all around. She was very serious because the orc began to choke on his own blood and stopped screaming. He fell to his knees and bent over, breathing heavily. His axe under the weight went deep into the ground and became a support. Well, that wasn't the end yet. Kong Sen quickly went up to attack again. At that moment, Cho Hanbel began to admit the thought that they could still defeat this monster. Min Hyunmo didn't even think about interfering. He expected this from Kong San and wanted to make sure that it was really like that, and he wanted to watch the performance until the end. After catching his breath a little, the bloody orc rose again and rushed at Kong San with a cry. His axe flew far from behind his back, and it must have been a very strong blow that could have cut even a thick tree in half. But he failed to carry out this blow and was immediately surrounded by fighters. Cho Hanbel, seeing that the monster had dropped the axe from his hands, immediately warned. Kong San was sweating profusely at that moment. The throw had taken him by surprise, but Kong San quickly realized that the orc was not aiming at him. His target was another person from the team, and he seemed to ignore Kong San. That guy didn't even suspect that he was the one in great danger because he was busy on another front. Kong San didn't understand why the bloody orc ran towards that particular fighter. The fighter noticed too late that danger was approaching him, and noticing the bloody orc, he froze in place with horror on his face. Kong San clearly remembered the words to the goddess that all members of his team had to return back to the camp alive. If someone had died at the hands of the bloody orc, that death would have been on the conscience of Kong San himself. When the team returned from the raid, the administration immediately offered their sincere apologies for what happened there. The administrator noted that during the reconnaissance of the territory, some mistake had occurred. You admitted that the blame was only on the administration because they did not notice the presence of the bloody orc in time. The guys weren't in their best shape. This fight was really tough for them. The administration promised to give maximum compensation for this incident. Min Henmo also apologized, noting that they should have completed the tests when the blood orc appeared, but decided not to do so and stated that he takes responsibility for what happened. Kong Sen looked at Min Hyunmo in surprise as he lowered his head in front of the entire team. No one present in that room smiled because the situation was completely serious. After bowing, Min Hyunmo turned to Kong San and asked if he could spare a little time to talk. The guy was taken into the office and given the opportunity to drink tea while talking. He was offered tea and waffles and asked not to refuse. Kong San gladly accepted such treats and immediately began to snack. Min Hyunmo immediately got down to business and noted that he had read Kong San's case, which said that he had been working as a human shield for 6 years, and he would check with the young man if this was true. Kong San was very surprised by this question and confirmed his words. Min Hyunmo said that he couldn't believe his eyes during the test and noted that Kong San was much better at playing the role of a tank than anyone he had ever met, and his rank E looked like a mistake in comparison. Min Hyunmo said that with such a tank on the front line, Dima thought even the bloody org rank D was not a problem for his group. After these words, Kong San understood why the administration did not stop the test earlier. Min Hyunmo suggested getting straight to the point and offered to join the ranger team. He explained that he was temporarily working as an examiner, but he planned to quit after a few months. Kong San was surprised that this man was a ranger. Min Hyun-mo suggested that Kang Sen be registered as a full-time employee or become a hired worker if the boy did not want to limit his opportunities. Min Hyun-mo noted how impressed he was by Kang Sen's final blow in the battle with the Blood Orc. Kang Sen rushed to protect his team member without hesitation. Even in this unpredictable case, it seemed like Kang Sen had a certain plan that he was acting on. It was really fascinating to watch. Then Kang Sen activated the will of the defender. His health was fully restored and his defense temporarily doubled. Min Hyun-mo was convinced to tell Kang Sen that not everyone could do this. Min Hyun-mo emphasized that in any case he promised that Kang Sen would be in good hands and handed the guy a contract and asked him to join the Rangers team. The Rangers were a special unit that supported the government. The ones who had previously accepted only the best wanted Kang Sen to join them. The boy couldn't believe it. He began to familiarize himself with the agreement. For him, everything that was happening was incredible and amazing. He was barely at rank E and no one thought that he would get such an opportunity. His hands were shaking violently from excitement, but suddenly he thought that he couldn't agree to this. The Rangers destroyed monsters that entered the real world and if necessary carried out missions in other worlds. Joining them meant willingly exposing yourself to danger. He assumed that perhaps this was what the goddess Asmuna wanted. He was afraid that she wanted to destroy him and was deliberately subjecting him to severe tests. Only after deciding to himself that he should have thought about it, the contract lying in front of him began to change. At that moment he was given the fourth trial of adversity, according to which Kang Sen had to become a member of the Rangers and dedicate himself to protecting the world, and as a reward he was given +2 points to strength and agility and holiness. Since he had no choice, Kang Sen Xusha agreed to Kim Myung-min's offer and signed a contract to become a ranger. He rubbed his eyes, trying to stop himself from seeing the contract from the goddess Asmuna that he had agreed to. He was very upset that the goddess would treat him like that, putting his life in incredible danger. V-Contact noted that you from the Rangers will provide optimal conditions for getting rid of the karmic debt, and Kang Sen should become a member of the squad and devote himself to protecting the world. To successfully pass the test, it was enough to accept Kim Myung-min's offer. Kang Sen was incredibly angry at Asmuna and cursed her in every possible way to himself because she did not let him read the real Ranger's contract. But he was trapped by his karmic debt and he had to agree even when he was unsure. Kang Sen exhaled heavily and told Kim Myung-min to agree to join the Rangers, which surprised him. Kim Myung-min smiled contentedly because the boy agreed so quickly and thanked him for this decision. Kang Sen stated that if he can be a mercenary, he wants to decide for himself whether to go on a mission or not, even if Kim Myung-min himself is his boss. He was interested in the spirit of green just to accept the offer and not go out of his way for the sake of the Rangers. He decided that he would only carry out those tasks about the necessity of which Asmuna would inform. If he took on the performance of all the duties of a ranger, he would expose himself to unnecessary dangers. Kim Myung-min agreed with Kang Sen's condition and thanked him for his work. Kim Myung-min took the contract from the table and showed a certain page to Kang Sen, noting that everything was written there. Kang Sen decided to get up and leave, noting that it was already time for him to go. But suddenly he felt completely uneasy and froze in place. A very strange and frightening vision appeared before his eyes. The guy immediately sat back down in the chair and bent over hard, trying to get rid of the annoying, scary pictures. He tried to lean on the table, thereby knocking over the cup of tea. Kim Myung-min looked at the young man suspiciously and asked if everything was okay with him. Kang Sen quickly recovered and regained consciousness, assuring that everything was fine. In fact, I wonder what it was. He assumed that this was the very special information that was contained in Asmuna's contract. Kang Sen almost immediately became even worse and he went into a severe coughing fit as well as a bout of severe nausea, which scared Kim Myung-min a little. A week later, Kang Sen began to live a completely new life again. He traveled to a new place on special buses. These were his first steps into a completely new life. That particular piece of information that caused him to have that terrible vision concerned his past life. As soon as he decided to take the test, that vision came to him. It turned out to be unbearably disgusting and I just didn't want to know or see it. After this introduction, he was to go to Chorwon in Gangwon province and complete the dungeon's trials, for which he would receive a fragment of memories of his past life as a reward. Asmuna wanted to pass on to him the memories of a monster nicknamed the Blood Demon. When another world contacted the reality on the surface, it was called a slichka, and when it happened underground, it was called a dungeon. Because of their position, people could rarely find such a place. The discovery of an unregistered dungeon that had remained undetected for decades was akin to the appearance of a gate to hell due to the terrible consequences, and so many thought. The key to Kong San's past life memories was very close and was located in that unregistered dungeon. Standing at the entrance to this dungeon, he thought that he did not know for what purpose Asmuna wanted to show him these memories, but he really wanted to get them. He couldn't get rid of his disgust for a whole week. It was hard to find out what the matter was. Having reached the descent into the dungeon, he began to prepare for the upcoming test. Before entering the registered dungeon, there were some things that needed to be done first. To begin with, Kong San created a magical fence that would prevent the monsters from escaping to the surface. Then, since he didn't know what kind of dungeon this would be, he had to make sure he had enough food and also prepare for battle. And on top of everything else, it was absolutely necessary to have a flashlight with you because it was very dark in the dungeon. In most dungeons, there was no light at all. When Kong San turned on the flashlight, he was very scared to see a human skull right in front of him. He jumped back sharply with a scream and began to shine the light in front of him, trying to figure out what was around him. What he saw confused him a little and even surprised him. There were several skeletons in front of him that needed to be dealt with before continuing on. This gave him the idea that the dungeon was clearly not empty. He remembered that he had once almost died fighting with one skeleton, and now there were 5 skeletons standing in front of him. He remembered how difficult it was to fight such monsters. Despite their skinny appearance, they were quite strong and agile. Kong San left his lantern on one of the ledges of the wall, illuminating the area around him, and entered the battle. With one sharp and precise movement, he pierced the skeleton with his sword. This caused the skeleton to let out a loud squeak, which probably resounded throughout the entire tunnel. Since the skeletons felt nothing, they attacked. As long as they were able to do so, it seemed that they could not do so with the holy power because it made them feel pain and destroyed all the creatures of darkness. Kong San noted that after his meeting with the goddess Asmuna, he had definitely become stronger and suggested that if the dungeon was inhabited only by the creatures of darkness, then perhaps he could deal with them alone. He had many doubts on the way to this dungeon, but once there he noticed that he no longer felt such disgust as before. Kong San thought that perhaps the goddess Asmuna wanted to give him some kind of gift for all his suffering. He reminded himself how many times he almost died and felt he deserved a good reward for it. Having dealt with the skeletons and gone further along the tunnel, he came across a small hall in the middle of which stood a large chest. The sight of this chest made the guy very happy, and he decided that this test was indeed his reward. He hurried to this chest, mentally thanking the goddess and Asmund for her generosity. But before he could reach the chest, a silhouette flashed in the shadows to his left, and then a huge monster appeared. He was very frightened by such a surprise and even jumped up on the spot. He was immediately stunned by the blow and thrown to the side. The blow was very strong, causing Kong San to groan. He managed to keep his balance and land on his feet without losing his alertness. But suddenly a powerful blow occurred. When Kansan rose, Grad saw a huge morning star that his opponent was swinging in the air. Kong San straightened up and looked up in horror to see his opponent. It was a huge monster in iron armor with a crown instead of a head riding a horse. Dullahar began to gain speed on his horse and began to swing his morning star more actively in order to deliver the next blow. Kong San quickly took out a small jar and unscrewed the lid. At this time, the Dullahar struck a blow that Kong San had to quickly dodge. Pushing off the ground with his hand, Kong San jumped to his feet again and stood up to his full height. He took out a sharp steel sword and was ready to counterattack the Dullahar. He was very worried because the Dullahar was very dangerous and one blow from it could destroy Kong San. The guy struck hoping that he hit, but unfortunately Kong San missed. He cursed, realizing that he had made a mistake. He looked at the monster's steel head. At that moment, the Dullahar swung his weapon again. Right in front of him, Kong San saw the huge spiked steel head of a Dullahar weapon flying straight at him. The ball was only a few centimeters from Kong San's head. Kong San tried to block the blow with his sword, holding it out in front of him. But after the danger had passed, he was very surprised that the skill of sharpening his weapon did not help. He thought to himself that Dullahar was indeed a real monster against whom it was worth putting in a lot of effort. Kong San gathered his strength and swung his sword again, striking. Took a lot of strength, but it was useless. He jumped aside and thought that if he broke the sword, who wouldn't be able to survive the attack of a D-rank monster? If he passed the test in the dungeon, he would receive a part of his past life memories. These words of the goddess sounded in his head every second, and again repeating them to himself, he thought of something. He looked at the chest that stood in the middle of the hall and assumed that he could take them without defeating this monster. This time all he had to do was sign a contract, and apparently there was no need to risk his life fighting such a monster. Kong Sen assumed that inside this chest was the reward that Asmuna had promised him, but at that moment there was no time to check whether it was true. She grabbed the chest under her arm and decided that for now it was possible to simply run away from this dungeon. But the question was how he could get past the Dullahar. Kong Sen couldn't even imagine how the big guy knew where and when he would attack if he didn't have a head. Kong Sen thought that maybe he should just run at random and try to overtake him. This was the only option to escape the dungeon at that moment. Kong Sen remembered something and took out another bottle from his belt, surprised that he hadn't thought of it before. The Dullahar's horse had eyes, and most likely it was thanks to it that the monster could understand what was happening around it. Kong Sen did her best to distract the horse, and it actually fell for it. When the horse reacted to the falling cap from the can, the tone neighed loudly, and the Dullahar also immediately prepared to attack. He began waving his morning star and spinning around in search of his enemies. Listen, she galloped in the direction where the cap fell, and this gave Kong Sen the opportunity to escape from this dungeon. Running towards the exit, Kong Sen turned towards the monster to check its location. Dullahar, riding a horse, tried to find Kansan and rushed around the dungeon hall from side to side. Realizing that there was no enemy there, Dullahar pointed his finger in the direction where Kansan was located. The magical fence that Kansan put up before entering didn't turn off for a very long time. You didn't let me leave. Kong Sen waved his arms in all directions, trying to somehow speed up the complete shutdown of the fence. I knocked on it. I was very worried that he wouldn't be able to escape in time. The magical fence installed at the entrance to the dungeon did not allow monsters to approach it, but people could not penetrate through it either, and deactivating the fence took some time. Kong Sen was very nervous and kept knocking on the fence so that he could jump out as soon as it turned off. And that's what happened. As soon as the barrier was removed, Kong Sen flew out. Kong Sen backed away from the entrance to the dungeon. After making sure he was safe, he exhaled and stretched out on the ground, and he thought that the entrance could no longer be blocked. When Kong Sen opened the chest, he found that his rewards were 1 skill spirit and a bottle of water. He never expected such a meager reward. He received a shield of trials, which he managed to connect with the guardian shield. At will, it allowed him to focus the attention of all nearby monsters on one point and was restored after 5 minutes. Activating the trial account temporarily increased defense by 20%, and the recovery effects were also temporarily doubled. Kong Sen didn't know whether to be happy or not, because only the tank's abilities had improved. After finishing the skill, he reached for a bottle of water. When he first heard about his past life, he quite logically thought that it was some kind of nonsense. But over time he realized that Asmuna was not lying to him. Little by little he got everything he wanted. He didn't care about the will of heaven. In order to get what he wanted, he had to remember his past life. He was ready to drink that water. He opened the lid and emptied the bottle gulp after gulp. As soon as he took the last sip, he felt what he had been waiting for so long. Standing opposite him was Du Changhyun. This man was a swordsman of the Volcano sect. Kong Sen found himself on a battlefield littered with a huge number of dead. Du Changhyun promised that he would destroy him, the bloodthirsty demon. He was ordered to attack. Kong Sen found himself in the body he had in his past life, right in the middle of a fight with his enemy. The demon rushed at Du Changhyun, smiling evilly, and he simply waited for the moment of the fight. After a long fight, Du Changhyun looked very bad. He was all wounded and had difficulty breathing, but he still remained on his feet. Du Changhyun looked at the blood demon, who was once again victorious. Du Changhyun tried to find out from him why he killed innocent people. At the hands of the bloody demon, many families perished. Women, men, and children. Du Changhyun tried to find out why the bloody demon drowned the entire country in the blood of its inhabitants. Demon turned to him and asked if he really wanted to know the real reason for this. The demon began to approach Du Changhyun. He walked slowly, and it turned out that he still wanted to tell about it. Du Changhyun knew that these were the last minutes of his life, but he hoped with all his heart to find out the reason for all this. The demon came closer to him and chuckled. The demon came out of the shadows and replied that he simply enjoyed killing. Du Changhyun couldn't believe his ears. He expected anything but this. Having stated his preferences, the bloody demon killed him too. At this point, Kong Sen came to his senses. He was very scared. He couldn't believe that this was actually a part of his existence. Seeing this, he felt horror gripping his entire body. He leaned on his knees and hands on the chest, trying to find the strength not to lose consciousness. He couldn't accept what he heard. What he learned was too cruel and terrifying. After this introduction, he obtained the Blood Demon Chi and the Blood Demon Ball mastery technique of the first form. He remembered himself as a little boy hiding in the bathroom with tears in his eyes. He heard his father swearing at his aunt and arguing about money. He wanted to take the money from her, but she was against it. They argued for a long time and loudly, and all this time Kong-san in her swimming trunks huddled in a corner out of fear. He also remembered himself on that day when something terrible happened. He was just riding the bus and looking at the ticket. He was humming a melody to himself, but suddenly he heard some scary sounds. Someone shouted sharply, and then someone else shouted. The sounds became louder. Well, it wasn't immediately clear what was happening. When the bus he was riding on got into an accident and many died except him. He remembers how he got up and climbed out of the rubble and looked around. The rescuers were trying to help the survivors and took them aside. He just turned his head in all directions. He understood that all the misfortunes happened precisely because of him. He realized that he was really to blame for everything. He believed that the death of his father and mother was also his fault, as were the deaths of those people in the accidents in which he was present. Kong-san thought that even the changes in the world and the appearance of monsters were precisely because of him. He was a completely harmless child, and at first it seemed that everything that happened to him was an accident, but it turned out that this was not the case. The phone rang and Kong-san picked up the phone. It was Chung Minek who called him and said that he was very happy to hear from him. Chung Minek invited Kong-san to join him and his men. Kong-san immediately got ready and hurried to meet Chung Minek. He immediately began asking how things were going and whether everything was okay with Kong-san. Young Miknek asked Kong-san with a big smile if he wanted to join his agency Chong-san. Kong-san looked quite broken. His eyes were dull. He looked at his comrade and asked about this agency. He didn't understand why the best company of hunters needed him, although that wasn't even the point. He heard that Minyuk became a hunter immediately after reaching adulthood. He didn't understand why he suddenly gave up this occupation, although he found a good agency. Taking a sip of lemonade, Kong-san thought that Minyuk was a good guy because he had achieved a lot. Moments from the past began to appear before his eyes. He remembered one of his meetings with Minyuk. One day they had a minor accident on a scooter with a friend and both were badly hurt. Minyuk and his friend were driving past her, and when they saw that Kong-san was hurt, they asked if everything was okay. Kong-san was asked if he was okay, and he stood up and rubbed his bruised elbow and assured that everything was fine. Comrade Kong-san said out loud that every time he rides with a friend he always falls. Well, Dasha, he said that it could be because Kong-san killed his parents. Of course Kong-san didn't like these words at all, and they hurt him a lot. He immediately got angry at this guy. Then Young Minyuk suddenly shouted, "But I swear at this guy that he shouldn't have talked to his friends like that." He jumped off the scooter and ran up to the guy and told him that even if he was angry, he needed to understand what could be said and what could not. Then Minyuk made the guy ask Kong-san for forgiveness. His friend actually came up to him and asked for an apology, asking him that he had said something wrong about his parents. Kong-san felt strange listening to this, but he replied that he forgave his friend. Minyuk returned to his friend and rode away on his scooter. Kong-san and his friend followed them, but he remembered this situation for a long time. He was so immersed in this memory that he forgot that he was present at a meeting with this man. Minyuk interrupted his memories and said that after 6 years Kong-san was already an E-rank hunter, which meant that he would now participate in higher-ranked raids. He looked at Kong-san and asked if he knew that with an agency all this would be much easier to do, and promised to find him a good team and help him develop. At that moment Kong-san was only thinking about whether he could continue to live like this. He wondered if he could continue to be a hunter when he was completely lost and did not know the answers to such questions. Kong-san replied that she just wanted to see him and smiled just a little. Kong-san wanted to remind Min-hyuk about that incident, but Min-hyuk interrupted him and asked about the fact that Kong-san most likely received the promotion not because of his skills. He noted that the guy remained at rank F for 6 years. The examiner probably just took pity on him, or it was luck. Minyuk continued saying that even a weak hunter like Kong-san would have a good career with a suitable manager like him. He noted that he would like to honestly admit that at their age it was already too late to dream of great success. Minyuk claimed that all the Sobs needed a human shield, even the most mediocre one. These words touched Kong-san. He returned to his thoughts, remembering what he had learned about his past life and who he was. This angered him because in this life he seriously paid for past sins and suffered greatly from it. He leaned his hands on the table and buried his head in them. It happened so suddenly that Minhyuk was taken aback and asked if everything was okay. Kong-san was in a terrible state and did not answer any questions for a very long time without raising his head. Minhyuk wondered out loud that Kong-san was simply overworked and needed a manager, but then Kong-san's phone rang. A message appeared on the screen that Kong-san had been officially accepted into the Ranger team. Kong-san stood up from the table and apologized for leaving so suddenly, noting that he had no time for all this right now. He continued to hold his head and told his friend that he really had come just to see him, and hesitating a little admitted that he also wanted to thank him. Minhyuk was completely taken aback, and not knowing what to say, he asked Kong-san not to forget his phone. He accepted the apology but still didn't understand what it was about. Kong-san was barely holding on. He was tormented by various memories and images from his past life that practically never left his head. Soon news broke that dictated an urgent order everywhere. The sector had been declared dangerous due to the unexpected appearance of an E-rank gate. An immediate evacuation was required until the situation was resolved. Minhyuk jumped up, swearing that this was happening at that very moment, and tried to figure out where the nearest shelter was. Kong-san noted that first they should somehow get out, suggested running after the others. But they didn't have time to get out before the monsters appeared, who quickly broke into the cafe where they were. The monsters began to attack visitors and destroyed everything in their path. One of the men got caught in a real trap. The monster's huge tail pinned him to the floor of the cafe. The man tried to break free and called for help. The woman, who was obviously with him, did not know how to help him and only screamed. The woman was calling for help, although one could guess that there were few people in that place who could rush to save the man. But Kong-san was not among those people. Minhyuk tried to stop him, explaining that this was just the beginning and that dozens of monsters would appear soon, and they should have run away because no one would blame an E-rank hunter for running away. Minhyuk asked Kong-san not to act like a hero and run away before he was killed. But Kong-san had no intention of running away. He was now driven by completely different goals, and besides, he was deeply offended by the words of his old comrade. He looked at the man who demanded help and at his wife, who had given in to hysteria and was trying to somehow get closer to her husband. He saw these huge lizards which would definitely have killed this innocent man. Kong-san knew that he couldn't retreat and escape with the others. Well, 3 of his past incarnations were boiling in his present one. He tried to get rid of this feeling all the time, but it was so strong that it was almost impossible. He remembered the hundreds of corpses that littered the streets of the city he had destroyed. Kong-san rushed out like this, using the blood demon ball possession technique. He also could not allow the thought that he would not be able to cope with these lizards. Very quickly, Kong-san managed to save the man from the clutches of the monster. This greatly surprised Minhyuk, who remained in place and was very confused. In this life, Kong-san was a completely different person and used the gifts of the past for other purposes. He shouted loudly to all the customers of the cafe to run away as quickly as possible. Now he wanted to save people, to help them even at the cost of his own life. He wanted to prove that he had changed. Minhyuk didn't understand what was happening. He saw his comrade like this for the first time in his life. The breakthrough situation was soon resolved. People were evacuated and taken care of. They called young Minhyuk and asked if he was able to persuade Kong-san, but Minhyuk said that he failed and that he was scolded harshly. He was asked if he had told Kong-san about the Chongsan agency. Minhyuk explained that he had told everything, but Kong-san was unmoved. Minhyuk wanted to explain to his superiors why this happened, but they didn't want to listen to him. The superiors gave the order to get Kong-san and force Arrow to be in Jiangsu since they needed his performance. Minhyuk's changes were not accepted. He was cursed and hung up on leaving him to deal with the situation at any cost. Putting his phone away, Minhyuk let out a heavy sigh. He still had no idea how he was going to complete this task and get Kong-san to agree to join the agency. He himself didn't understand anything. He didn't understand how he could do his job, and he also didn't understand how Kong-san had managed to acquire such skills. The number of lizards increased very quickly. They were all armed and immediately rushed into battle. People ran away with their eyes full of horror. There was chaos everywhere. People were running, trying to save themselves, screaming. Kong-san tried to distract the lizards and deal with them as quickly as possible. There was already a whole pack of lizards. He needed to buy time, otherwise the situation would become even more dangerous. He used the Shield of Trials. He had to use all his skills to defeat such a horde of monsters. The lizards reacted to this immediately. Even those who were about to have lunch. They were attracted by Kong San's presence, or rather his call. The lizard let go of the man. He immediately became interested in her. The man continued to scream. I called for help, covered myself with my hands, but discovered that I had let him go and walked away. All the monsters took turns releasing their victims and began to advance on Kong San. There were too many of them, and Kong San was worried that he wouldn't be able to handle them alone, but in a few minutes help was supposed to arrive. He just needed to hold on. He couldn't be distracted for a second because these monsters were very dangerous thanks to their weapons in the form of tridents, probably sharp at the ends. Thanks to the trial score, Kong San's defense has been increased by 20%. Then Kong San activated the will of the protector. The recovery rate of his defense and health has been increased by 82% proportional to the number of enemies. This gave Kong San the opportunity to fight off the monsters for some time. But the problem remained the same. There were too many lizards, and they were running towards Kong San from all sides. Some suffered defeats, but this had a negative effect on the overall danger of the situation. Afterwards, Kong San activated the Blood Demon Chi. This gave him the ability to temporarily increase his attack power by 2%. Kong San did not stop for a very long time, and only after defeating several creatures did he freeze for a moment, seeing his bloody sword. He couldn't take his eyes off him, which showed bewilderment and surprise. But he was quickly brought back by the cries of the people he was supposed to save. He was practically surrounded by monsters. He saw many sharp tips of lizard weapons right in front of him, which were trying to pierce Kong San's body. The reinforcements arrived in time. They were military troops who arrived with good firearms. The military was well prepared for such cases and knew exactly how to deal with such monsters. Very soon the lizards were dead. The entire area around the cafe and the establishment itself suffered greatly from the invasion of monsters. The military had firearms and the necessary equipment to quickly deal with this chaos. When the last monster was killed, the commander gave the order to cease fire. The fighters ceased fire and were given the order to comb all the buildings around in search of victims, and also to clear out those monsters that might have gotten lost somewhere. It was clarified that each platoon inspected the building with its commander. The fighters had to make sure that the survivors were okay and, if necessary, help people who needed it. The military began to carry out their mission and went in search of the monsters. The building was half destroyed, and of course there could have been people left under the rubble. This operation had to be carried out very quickly because every minute counted. In one of the cafe halls was Kong San. He was sitting near a destroyed concrete slab, leaning on his sword. There were corpses of lizards lying around him. Kong San was wounded and exhausted. When one of the soldiers found him, he was very taken aback to see Kong San in such a terrible state. He shouted to him, "I hope the guy was alive." In another hall, one of the soldiers stumbled upon something important and called the commander to show him the find. They found surveillance camera footage outside. The video camera captured the appearance of the monsters and how Kong San rushed into battle with them. Now the commanders also saw what this guy was capable of, what skills he had, and how brave he was. The video also showed how many wounds Kong San received and that he continued to fight until the last monster died, no matter what. The commander asked his soldier who this guy was, assuming he was a ranger. The soldier replied that he had no idea about him. The fighter noted that he appeared out of nowhere and dealt with all the monsters on his own. This really amazed the commander. Bez assumed that he was probably another hunter and decided to play the hero, but also thanks to him, there were no casualties among the civilian population. The commander gave the order to find out who this guy was and arrest him, although he did not deny that he could really act for the good. He noted that they still couldn't allow incompetent hunters to do whatever they wanted because that would cause a lot of problems. They wanted to arrest him, but they didn't even know whether he had survived or had been dead for a long time. They tried to bring him to his senses, they called him by name, but it didn't bring any effect for a long time. But still Kong San came to his senses and, opening his eyes and seeing a military man in front of him, asked who he was. In front of him was Kim Chung-sik. He was the one who found him first before the order was given to arrest Kong Sang. He told him that Kong Sang saved him in the dungeon and he was also a human shield. Kong San really remembers this person because it all started with him. Kong San remembered the donation for the man's grandmother's surgery, and became curious about how it went. Kim Chung-sik was very worried and noted that Kong-san was terribly injured and also asked if he really dealt with all the monsters by himself. Kong-san didn't answer these questions and only said that it was time for him to go. Kim Chung-sik was not happy about this because the savior was in a terrible state. He really wanted to help him because Kong-san had done so much for him and his family. Kong-san tried to stand up but immediately fell back to the floor. He had no strength at all. Kim Chung-sik looked closely at Kong-san and realized that he was seriously injured. As far as Kim Chung-sik knew, Kong-san's rank was F. And if he had been found, he would have been arrested. He couldn't allow the one who saved him to be arrested and decided to help him get away from this place. It was against the rules and he could get into trouble. He couldn't leave Kong-san in that state and expose him to other dangers. He threw him onto his back and very carefully but quickly ran towards the exit of the establishment. Kong-san lost consciousness and came to his senses only when he was already safe, although he himself did not know it yet. In front of him, he saw some old woman, but everything was too blurry. Clarity came too slowly, but he realized that he was in some unfamiliar place. When he managed to fully come to his senses and open his eyes, he discovered that he was in a hospital room and there was a woman sitting next to him. He asked where he was. The woman smiled, happy that Kong-san had already woken up, and asked him not to get up, explaining that they were in the hospital. The woman noted that the doctor said that everything was fine with Kong-san, although when he first arrived at the hospital it seemed that everything was really bad. The woman again asked him not to worry and to rest for now. She then began to feed him, telling him that he should eat well and sleep well and also listen to the doctors. She smiled as she fed him with a spoon and noted that he didn't have to do anything else, not even raise his hands to eat. The woman noted that Kong-san saved her grandson, and she had wanted to see the savior for a long time. The woman noted that her grandson said that Kong-san was a very good person, but Kong-san himself had nothing to say in response to this. He just ate the food they gave him and kept quiet. Suddenly a young man ran into the room and, addressing this woman, as if she were his mother, told her that he was already free. The woman was surprised because he should have had a lot to do, but for some reason he wandered in here. Then in the evening, near the B Hotel in Vansimni, a gate of rank F opened. The incident could have led to numerous losses among the civilian population, but one brave man contributed to the evacuation. The news said that this citizen disappeared from the scene as soon as the situation was resolved safely. But they managed to find an eyewitness. This eyewitness was Kim Chung-sik. He was interviewed. Kim Chung-sik said that when he arrived at the scene, there was an incredibly large number of monsters lying around the brave man and he was seriously injured. He said that he tried to hand him over to his platoon, but he quickly disappeared. Kim Chung-sik noted that thanks to this hero, many losses were avoided, and perhaps he would be against what is said about him, but he would still like people to know that such a good person exists. Kim Chung-sik said that in modern times it was surprising that such virtues remained. He kept praising Kong-sang, who naturally saw the news broadcast. He didn't understand why they were doing this, although he admitted that at that time he really found himself in danger. This was not a test of Asmuna. It was a real battle that he chose himself. Compared to the Asmuna tests, this was really very difficult and dangerous. If things had gone a little differently, he could have lost his life. There were a lot of monsters and they were all quite strong. At the moment he noted that he had killed 10, but the monsters did not retreat. Then he suggested that perhaps he should not have interfered. But then he activated the Blood Demon Chi. His attack power was temporarily increased by 10%. This skill is what helped him win and get out alive. If he hadn't had such abilities, everything would have ended very badly. Thanks to this, he was able to deal with all the monsters that were there, not counting some that were destroyed by military reinforcements. Kong-sen noticed how the smell of blood excited him. At that moment it was as if he was not in control of himself and was giving in to some unknown instincts within himself. He destroyed everything in his path, and it was surprising where he got so much strength from. Then he gave in to what was inside him. Part of the monster he had been in the past was still with him. Well, this helped him now in this life to fight the same monsters for the sake of saving other people's lives. After killing the monsters, the wild essence of the blood demon was partially released. Kong-sen felt that something had happened, but he couldn't answer what exactly had changed in him. He knew he didn't plan to do this, but he couldn't control himself. Soon the blood demon chi was activated once more. Kong San's attack power was increased by 20%. He didn't stop and used this skill over and over again until everything was covered in the blood of his enemies. He was possessed by the spirit of this monster. He approached the essence that had been sitting so deep inside him all this time. He could not give himself an account of what he was doing with such cruelty. After the battle ended, he completely restored his health and increased his defense. At that moment, the abnormal status of the madman was deactivated. He sat in a hospital bed and, recalling everything that happened on the battlefield, he considered that it was real madness. And if the will of the defender had not deactivated the status of a madman, it was scary to imagine what could have happened. He realized that the power of the Blood Maiden's chi was clearly not from this world. Even the system could not properly explain what it was. He covered his face with his hands, trying to cope with the emotions that had washed over him. The woman continued to feed him because he needed to gain strength. She asked him with special tenderness to take a piece of apple and eat it. Kong San straightened up and, catching his breath, thanked the woman and took the apple. The woman, without looking up from the news, noted that there were such good people. Kong San smiled and agreed with her. The woman shared that one of the same good people donated money for her operation. She did not know that it was Kong San. He didn't want to talk about it and nodded to her in surprise. The woman shared that she was very surprised, but she would like to know what kind of person it was, although he wished to remain anonymous. She was surprised that someone would send such a large sum to someone they didn't even know, but the nurses reassured her. Hearing all this, Kong San's chest suddenly began to hurt. The woman looked very sad and said that it was very difficult for her to accept such money and use it. Kong San jumped up from these words, amazed out loud that she still hadn't had the operation. The woman said that the operation was soon to take place, but she was not in a very good condition yet, and it was worth waiting. Kong San immediately calmed down because he thought that he had wasted his money. The woman didn't calm down. I said that she didn't know why she had such an award in life. She was very happy, but it didn't fit in her head. She said that her Chunsik grew up without any parents. The woman assumed that she was blessed so that he would not be left completely alone. On the one hand, it was very nice to hear, but on the other hand, it was very awkward. Kansan understood that it was very difficult for a woman to accept such gifts, although it was also difficult for him to give these gifts, but he knew that he was doing good. He was not like that monster and knew how valuable human life was. He smiled at the woman and said that she deserved help and hoped that her operation would go well. Kong San quickly recovered and returned to his mission. He needed to know more about the blood demon chi. He needed to figure out what caused the increase in damage of this chi. Since he couldn't experiment with the blood demon chi in a real fight, he had to practice controlling it in the training center. The conditions there were good, although artificial. But the training would definitely do him good. The administrator suggested checking Kong San's application and asked if his goal was to improve his reaction and develop his skills. He warned that the simulation would be active for a month and he would not be able to exit. Kong San smiled and confirmed everything that was needed. The administrator noted that Kong San had chosen the usual course and that there would be a schedule to check on the training grounds. A woman in uniform approached the administrator and offered to show Kong San. Kong San was surprised because there had never been any guides in this camp before. The woman noted that to develop his skills, he would have access to a battle with 20 monsters of a certain level every day. While seeing Kong San off, the girl explained that if he manages to deal with everyone, he will have to wait 24 hours until the next training session. Having led him into the training hall, the girl warned him that she was closing the doors, and Kong San confirmed his consent. Unbuttoning his sweater and getting ready for training, he convinced himself that he could handle everything. Just before the doors closed, the girl remembered something and turned to Mr. Kong San again. It was the goddess Asmuna, who declared that he had been granted the 5th trial of adversity, and winked at him, noting that bad karma had increased the difficulty level of the training. The time on the set was supposed to flow slower than in the outside world, and if Kong San could survive 300 days inside, equivalent to 30 days outside, he would be able to clear his karma. As a reward for this, he received plus 5 units of holy power. Kong San could not have expected this at all, because when he went to this training camp, he had set himself up for something completely different. He had no other choice. Soon the 30-day subscriptions ran out and he was asked to leave. Kong San handed his card back to the administration. The administrator started to congratulate him, but suddenly hesitated when he looked at him better. He was surprised and doubted that Kong San always had such an aura. Kong San had really changed a lot during all this time. He smiled and wished everyone well before heading out. The first thing he did was go to the barber shop to get a haircut because his hair had grown a lot over the last month. He washed his hair thoroughly and did his usual hairstyle, after which he visited the pool to relax a little after such a stressful period. Having finished tidying himself up, he went to one of the restaurants to have a hearty meal. He greedily threw away everything he had ordered for himself because he was very hungry. He finished his soup straight from the plate without missing a single drop of broth. After that, he decided to eat some ice cream. Kong-san arrived home only after nightfall. He was incredibly tired and could barely stand on his feet, and only when he entered the apartment did he manage to change his clothes. He dropped his bag right in the middle of the room and fell. His legs couldn't hold him up at all. He got up with difficulty, turned on the light, and went to bed. He looked so tired that it seemed he would sleep for several days. He fell onto the bed happy that it was finally all over. The fifth trial of adversity was successfully passed, and the goddess reluctantly granted him the promised reward. In Songdong Wansimni, there was also a monster breakthrough. There were again a lot of monsters, and they were very strong. It was impossible to do without reinforcements there, and the military immediately went to this call. The fighters were very well trained and did their job well. It's true that it was impossible to kill such a monster with one bullet, and it was necessary to continue firing for a long time. Moreover, these creatures still had intelligence and could protect themselves from shelling and then continue to attack. Well, any situation that could arise was not new for any fighter. Private First Class Paku was given the command to fire. Private Pak fired and hit the monster right in the head, breaking through the car door window that the monster was using to close itself. Private Pak raised the barrel of his weapon and removed his glasses. The private expressed gratitude to Chun-sik for the fact that thanks to him, he hit the target on the first try. Chun-sik smiling replied that the private had done a great job himself. After everything was finished, the team got into the car and drove to the camp. The private was talking on the phone. I told the other person that I understood everything and asked him to be careful. The private hung up and swore discontentedly. Chun-sik smiled and asked if it was the private's younger brother. He confirmed it and noted that his brother had not listened to him at all. Chun-sik suggested that it must be family to take great care of his brother. But he, hearing this, laughed and said that his brother was a little freak and offered to show a photograph. Chun-sik covered the private's phone screen with his hand and didn't look at the photo. He immediately became serious in his face and said that it was a very bad omen. You agreed with him and decided not to show the photo of your brother. One of the fighters called out from the back of Chun-sik's car and said that they had guests. This surprised Chun-sik very much because he definitely didn't know anyone and couldn't even guess what kind of guest had come to visit them. A girl was brought to him. She smiled and introduced herself as Kim Min-yeon, explained that she was a reporter, and handed him a business card. Chun-sik became a little tense and, taking the business card, demanded to explain the reason for the visit. The girl wanted him to tell her about the man who became the hero of the tanker incident in Vansimni, since it did not attract much attention, but he showed impressive abilities for an E-rank tanker. Chun-sik did not agree with her request and noted that he went to the interview on his own initiative. The girl smiled and said that she understood him and that it was not good to reveal a person's identity against his will, and emphasized that she came to him because he shared her opinion. The girl looked at him and said that whoever wanted to hide the identity of another person did not give such interviews. The girl noted that he spoke with the enthusiasm of a man who desperately wanted to praise a hero, and she, as a very good journalist, wanted to tell everyone about the exploits of a good man. Chun-sik was very worried. His palms were sweating. He told the girl that she was wrong and he thought that she was some kind of psychic. The girl smiled again and said that she already knew in advance that she would be refused even if she put pressure on the private. She reached into her bag, noting that she had another offer. Kim Chung-sik shrank even more and waited with apprehension to see what the girl would say. The girl gave him an envelope, but at that very moment other fighters called him because it was time to leave. He hastily asked the girl what it was, but she only smiled at him in response. When he had some free time, he finally got acquainted with the envelope that the journalist gave him. It was written there that it was a small gift from the journalist, and if Chun-sik was grateful for this gesture, she would like him to reciprocate. He opened the envelope, still not understanding what they wanted from him. He took out a donation check. This document confirmed the act of donation from Kong-san. A few months ago, after Kim Jun-sik woke up from that terrible fight, thanks to Kong-san's help, everything was calm for a while, and he was just recovering. This was difficult for him, and many thoughts persistently crept into his head. Having gathered himself, he decided to please the girls with coffee for all their efforts. The girl administrator was very nice and sincerely thanked him for such a nice gesture. The girl next to him stretched and also thanked him for such a rescue because the two of them were almost falling asleep. Kim Chung-sik smiled and asked about the unpaid bills. The girls were glad that he brought up this topic because they had something to say. This is exactly what made him nervous. He thought that they wanted to tell him about his debts for his grandmother's treatment and began to beg not to throw her out on the street. Well, the girls said that it was not about that, but about the fact that someone donated money to him and the amount covered all the bills. Kim Chun-sik did not immediately hear what exactly the administrators told him, and continued to beg them not to do anything bad to his grandmother and promised that they were doing everything to find the money. The girls tried to bring him to his senses and repeated again that all his hospital bills were anonymously paid, even the entire amount for his grandmother's operation, and asked him not to worry anymore. When he heard this, he was incredibly shocked because he could not imagine who could do such a thing. He looked at the donation check with tears streaming down his face. He couldn't contain his emotions. He was sorry that he found out so late that it was Mr. Kong-sen. He didn't even thank his benefactor when he stood in front of him. I can't stop my tears because I understood how much I owed this man. He sat down on one of the beds and tried to hold back his tears. Now he trusted that journalist more and took out her business card to contact her. The girls immediately received a new message on their phone. She was glad to receive a message from Kim Chun-sik. He thanked her for the gift but noted that he could not tell her anything about the person she was interested in. The girl was upset and felt that he had no respect for business relationships. She believed that Kim Chun-sik was very wrong in hiding the identity of that person, and she only became more interested in finding out who he was. She was a sensation hunter and never gave up on any case that interested her. She promised herself that she would definitely find out who that man was. Meanwhile, Kong-sen didn't even think about the fact that some reporters might be looking for him and pestering Kim Chung-sik about him. He was on one of the raids. The only thing that was going through his mind was that everything was monotonous. The E-rank hunter-attacker Cho Hambyul, who was 21 years old, thanked Kong-sen very much for quickly responding to his request, although by that time he had doubts about whether they should move on due to the weather conditions. Additional tank Chun Changwoo also said that he didn't like the fog in the black ants' real habitat and emphasized that the reconnaissance team should have warned them. Yun Woo Bin was a mage in this team for an hour. Kong-san was very upset because he had to spend time, but now the raid was in doubt. He doubted that the fog could just appear and thought that if he accepted his karma, he would not be able to avoid problems. Kong-sen coughed to attract attention and said that there was nothing wrong with it and everything could be solved. He explained that visibility was poor due to the fog, but silhouettes could be discerned at a distance of 10 m. They should secure an area where they would not be disturbed by the terrain features and set up warning lines around the perimeter to know when the monsters were approaching. Cho Hambyul asked with some disbelief if this meant that they should just wait as a team, but Kong-san corrected that they should lure out the monsters. He said that he had taken some golden honey with him just in case. The black ants went crazy over it, and if you smeared it on the stones you could lure them. This is what Kong-san immediately took up. Chun Changwoo couldn't understand who would take snacks for ants, and such an expensive one at that. He had never heard of such a strategy and was somewhat skeptical about it. He thought Kong-san was a bit strange and didn't know if he could be trusted. Besides, there was nothing visible around and he doubted that it could work at all. But Kong-san knew exactly what he was doing and had no doubts about his plan. Indeed, soon the ants appeared. The ants reacted very quickly to their favorite treat and crawled out of their hole. The team was prepared for their arrival and was in ambush. The magician held his staff tightly in his hands and leaned against one of the stones, waiting for the right moment to attack. The ants were quietly enjoying the honey scattered around until they noticed the presence of uninvited guests. But suddenly one of the ants noticed the team of fighters and squeaked loudly, notifying his other relatives about it. Kong-sen used one of her skills to increase her defense by 5% according to the number of enemies and rushed to attack. He dealt with these monsters very quickly. They weren't that big and Kong-sen easily destroyed them one by one. The problem was that their numbers were growing very quickly, and this was one of the main dangers of these monsters. There were too many of them, and that was the difficulty of defeating them. It was necessary to act very quickly because the ants could surround and it was difficult to get out of there. Something similar happened to Kong-san. He didn't immediately notice that one of the ants was jumping on him. The ant grabbed him by the hair and pulled him to the ground. Taken by surprise, Kong-san gave in and fell to the ground. Well, he immediately turned over and jumped to his feet and killed the ant. Kong-san fought the monsters in close combat well. For example, the leader of this group used a bow and tried to stay away. With the help of Cho Hanbel's arrows, he was able to effectively reduce the number of monsters from a long distance without exposing himself to unnecessary danger. Kong-san, deciding to retreat a little, almost got caught and was shot by his arrow. Larger ants were crawling out too. They were squeaking loudly, calling for more and more fighters to help. Such monsters could be easily killed. Another ant giant was cut in half. It was Chun Chong-woo who did this. He distrusted Kong-san more than anyone else and doubted his plan. But when the plan worked and the ants started to crawl out, he fought just like everyone else. I looked at my leader and Kong-san and noted for myself that they both did a poor job and were not afraid to act even though visibility was zero. But now he was worried about Mach of their team. Looking for him with his eyes, he discovered that he was standing behind a rock and it seemed he was just hiding. But the attention from the cowardly magician quickly disappeared. Kong-san's health and defense have been temporarily increased by 18% according to the number of enemies. A whole huge army of new ants ran out from the snores which the others called with their squeak. Chun Chong-woo noticed that the ants were so noisy that he couldn't figure out where the sound was coming from in the whole show and asked everyone to be very careful. The magician shook violently with fear and almost turned blue. He was afraid to rush into battle and tried to sit unnoticed in a secluded place. Well, he became even more scared when one of the ants ran straight towards him. Chun Chong-woo heard the magician's cry behind him and turned around to see a picture that was incomprehensible to him. The ant pounced on the magician, who tried to push it away with his staff and did nothing else. He was very afraid, especially when he saw the huge tentacles of this ant that were ready to grab him in the face. This picture made Chun Chong-woo very angry. Fury just boiled up inside him. Kan-san rushed to the aid of the magician, fought off the ant, and freed his comrade. Well, by doing so he endangered himself because his attention was distracted by something completely different. One of the ants grabbed his hand from the other side. The ant held his wrist tightly with its tentacles and could easily leave him without a hand. Kong-san used the iron body skill and strengthened his right arm, which the ant latched onto to prevent the limb from being lost. After which he pushed the creature away from himself and struck it. He cut the thread on which a certain medallion was hanging with his sharp sword. The piece of iron flew off to the side and immediately disappeared from sight in the thick of dust and chaos. Kong-san used the trial shield to draw the attention of all the monsters to himself and give his team a chance to attack. Well, in general, it was not the help of his team that was important to him, but the fact that his attention would be focused only on his enemies and not on protecting other people. He dealt with the entire army of ants very quickly. Cho Hanbul looked at him with admiration. He couldn't believe his eyes that Kong-san was capable of such a thing. He understood that only a month had passed since Kong-san's exam, but the E-rank hunter did not understand how someone managed to become so strong so quickly. Chun Chong-woo asked Kong-san if he was really an E-rank hunter, since he wanted to calmly say that he was a D-rank hunter. Cho Hanbel completely agreed with his comrade's question, although he didn't say it out loud. Cho Hanbel asked Kong-san what was going on at the training center and asked him to share some advice. In the training center, Kong-san received the status of chi distortion. Then he was absolutely convinced that Asmuna was trying to kill him because what he had lived through was beyond his comprehension. He suffered a lot and went through many trials. At some point, he even stopped hoping that he would come out of there alive. Well, despite this, he also felt the essence of the blood demon even more strongly. He stopped completely uncontrollable under such influence, so he could go through a lot. But he could not share it with anyone. Kong-san blushed with excitement and smiling said that he just tried very hard to practice and fell on the fool and asked if there were any other ways. Kong-san's expression suddenly changed, and he whispered to the leader that he thought the surprise was his fault and suggested telling the others about it. Cho Hanbul asked if he meant his bad luck. Chun Chong-woo intervened in this conversation and asked if something unexpected had happened, and then noted that with a tank like Kong-san there was nothing to be afraid of. Kong-san thanked him for these words. Chun Chong-woo smiled and said that he was glad because he had never been in a team with such a good tank. But there was still one thing that worried Chun Chong-woo. He asked the team members out loud why the magician had not done anything all this time. Kong Sen also noticed this and agreed that Chun Chong-woo was absolutely right. While he and Cho Hanbel dealt with the ants with Zhang Chang-woo taking on the monsters trying to sneak up on them from behind, the magician didn't take a single step. He just stood there covering himself with his club, hiding in the rocks, shaking with fear. Chun Chong-woo asked him why he was going on a raid if he was going to do nothing. But then Cho Hanbel intervened and asked him to wait and not make a fuss. Cho Hanbel asked to explain the situation instead of the magician. It was very strange, but the guys agreed to it and Cho Hanbel started to tell, but he didn't have time to say anything important. The entire team felt the ground shaking beneath them. Kong Sen cursed silently to himself, not content with the fact that some kind of horror had started again. It was another setback for him, but it was also a disaster for the rest of the group. He was granted the 6th trial of adversity. The villain's karma increased the difficulty of the raid. The ground beneath them collapsed and they fell underground. Everyone was very surprised by what was happening and tried to understand the problem. Someone cleared up the situation for all the fish, explaining that they had fallen into an anthill, which was very bad because the soldier ants were about to attack them. Health restoration protection began to increase sharply, first by 10%, then by 20%. And the percentage continued to grow until it reached the mark of 120%. This quickly led to despair among all the fighters. They found themselves in very difficult and dangerous situations. The soldier ants were D-rank monsters and weren't much stronger than the worker ants. Kong Sen thought that the anthill with workers and soldiers should be of rank C, and such a jump could only mean one thing. It was the Asmuna's antics. Cho Hanbel fell and immediately ran up to the magician to check if everything was okay with him. Kong Sen also approached them and asked what happened and if he got hurt during the fall. It was obvious that the leader was hiding something. He wanted to confess, but it was very difficult for him. As a child, Vyubina was almost killed by a monster, so sometimes he had panic attacks due to psychological trauma. This passed in a short time. Chun Chong-woo heard this and grimaced slightly. He started to swear at why they took a mage into a raid with such a problem and called Cho Hanbel sick in the head for such a decision. Kong Sen turned around and looked at him, generally understanding what he was talking about. Chun Chong-woo said that they fell into an anthill that was already bad, and they also had a pit that was starting to choke from fear. Cho Hanbel only apologized to him very quietly. At that moment, Kong San's defense and health regeneration were increased by 35% according to the number of enemies. Chun Chong-woo asked if he was willing to take responsibility if everyone died. Kong San realized that he had to take matters into his own hands and ran up to Chun Chong-woo and tried to calm him down. Chun Chong-woo was in a great panic. He was still young but had already participated in 30 raids in the past 6 months. He knew the basics well. But if his panic continued, he would be unable to do anything. Kong San noted that he had probably never been in a raid whose rank exceeded his own and said that was why he was shaking so much and was not himself. Kong San stated that he had been in hundreds of raids and survived even in such a difficult situation, and if Chun Chong-woo couldn't trust himself, he should trust him and fight. Kong San asked him to calm down and look around, noting that it didn't matter how many ants there were, and in any case they could only move through tunnels. This meant that they had a chance, and Kong San promised to take on the 3 tunnels behind him and instructed Chun Chong-woo to watch the ones behind him. Chun Chong-woo calmed down a little and said that he would try to do it. Kong San turned to Hanbel and asked that when Woo-bin calmed down they focus on the ants from the small tunnel while he himself would buy time for the team. He approached one of the tunnels as close as possible and got ready. He kept telling himself that he could handle it. He had done this many times before. There were 35 ants in total, and he had a chance to handle them all. One could only hope that not all of these ants were soldiers. As soon as he heard the ants approaching, he activated the Guardian Shield. It was necessary to enter the battle immediately because the ants were already there. The ants were very fast, and Kong San noted that he had to stop as many as possible before they exited the tunnel. He also needed to move quickly, keeping up with the ants to have a chance of winning. He took out a sharp steel sword and rushed at one of the ants. The blood demon Chi has reached the 2nd level. Soon a huge ant crawled out of the tunnel and began to squeak loudly, deafening everyone. Kong San noted that his skills were insufficient. His defense was increasing, but his attack power was still basic. He decided that he needed to increase the blood demon Chi skill. He continued to fight the ants, which became more and more numerous. He had to run right on the shells of these ants. This gave him the ability to move as fast as his enemies. All the ants were focused only on him while the rest of the team members were just preparing for the battle. Soon, with the protection, the health regeneration began to decrease. This meant that the number of ants was significantly reduced. Soon these figures decreased by 10%, which indicated a good result and that no new ants appeared. At that moment, the blood demon chi was activated and the attack power temporarily increased. Kong San went a little crazy again and started chopping down everyone in his path. The more enemies he killed, the higher his attack power became and his health regeneration decreased. Despite this, there were still a lot of ants and he fought them alone. He managed to quickly deal with each of these huge insects. At some point in the battle, Kong San noted that they had broken through. His attack power increased by 4%. He ran forward towards the tunnels. The difficulty of this battle was that the team found itself in a limited space and had no way to escape until they killed all of their opponents. Soon the rest of the team joined Kong San and things became a little easier. Chun Changwu stopped worrying about his life and gave it his all in the fight. Well, completely by accident, he made a mistake and one of the ants stung him. When he returned, he saw how the monster's teeth pierced his skin. He became nervous again. Anxiety rolled over him with more force, but he tried to control himself. He gathered his strength and counterattacked the monster, ignoring his bite. The ant squealed loudly after receiving a strong blow. He threw the monster away from him and mortally wounded it. But after that, he thought it was all over. He was in too much pain and he was sure he couldn't handle the rest alone. Kong San hurried to him and placed his hand on the deep wounds from the ant's teeth. He used a recovery aura to heal Chun Changwu, who was taken aback by this gesture. He asked what Kong San was doing, but he only asked him to pull himself together and continued to heal his wounds. Chun Changwu shouted Kong San's name loudly. He saw that he was also in a bad way. He was there before too. Chun Changwu asked why Kong San was treating him when he was even worse. But Kong San couldn't share it. It was all about the test, he just had to do it. Chun Changwu said that he really appreciated this help, but he emphasized that he himself needed treatment. When Kong San finished his treatment, Chun Changwu immediately rushed into the attack, fighting off the ants that by that time had managed to get very close to them. After finishing treating Chun Changwu, Kong San thought that now it was his turn to recover. He acted according to a clear plan. First, he had to take care of his team members and divert all danger only to himself and then deal with what concerned him personally. Having driven the ants away from himself for a short while, he began to restore his health. Kong San noted that the ants were only increasing in number, and even with good treatment his team would quickly run out of steam. Kong San meets another part of the ant army and wonders how many of them there could be in the depths of this anthill. Wu Bin was still afraid. He was shaking with fear and he couldn't control these feelings. He didn't understand why it happened only to him. He knew that he was very guilty before his team, but he couldn't do anything about it. Cho Hanbel tried to stay close to his friend so that he could protect him. Cho Hanbel tried to bring him to his senses and force him to finally join the battle because his help was very much needed by the whole team. Cho Hanbel tried to convince his comrade that everything he was afraid of was not real, but his nerves couldn't take it anymore either. Cho Hanbel grabbed the Wu Bin by the collar and started shaking him to bring him to his senses. He started yelling at him for not seeing what was happening around him. Cho Hanbel drew his attention to Kong San and Chun Changwu, who were fighting for his life, and scolded him for how he could sit idly by. He advised him not to involve others in his desire to die. Cho Hanbel stopped shaking him, shouting at him not to kill innocent people with his pens. The Wu Bin's mind was clouded. It was very difficult for him to control himself. While the leader was shaking him, a memory appeared before his eyes. Cho Hanbel told him after his ordeal that he had seen an incredible man. When one of the group members was in danger, that tank took the hit. He couldn't believe his eyes. Wu Bin didn't react to this at all and only looked at his comrade from under his oba. Cho Hanbel was talking about what it would be like to be on the same team with such a person. I suggested that it could help cope with Wu Bin's psychological trauma. When the conversation turned to his injury, Wu Bin perked up. He was very interested in this question. He was just a child when that terrible incident happened to him that turned his whole future life upside down. He ran as best he could, holding his mother's hand. But at the most inopportune moment he tripped and fell. Mom tried to get him up as quickly as possible. She hurried him and pulled his arms. He remembered how much pain it was then. His mother screamed and asked her son not to cry and just hold on to her as tightly as possible. She kept trying to pick him up and carry him to some safe place. But that didn't happen. Wu Bin, already an adult, felt blood on his face. He remembered the feeling of horror he experienced then. He knew that, as an adult, he had to deal with this problem because he was only putting everyone else in danger. He gritted his teeth and gathered all his courage. It was very difficult for him to overcome himself, but he managed it. He promised Cho Hanbel to try and do something for everyone. He stepped out a little from his hiding place and grabbed his staff. He didn't want anyone to die because of him again and was determined to change the situation. He began to summon all his magical energy, and to his great happiness he succeeded. The fear retreated from him and he could fight fully again. He focused on Kong-san, but his attempt to cast a spell failed. It was not possible to cast a spell on Chun Changwu either. He tried to concentrate. He scolded himself, "I know I have to act as quickly as possible." Cho Hanbel tried to cover him and give him time to activate all his skills. He really hoped that everything would work out. But it took some time. He noticed that Kong-san was attacked by an ant which he was unable to fight off immediately. He found himself pinned to the ground, practically trapped. Wu Bin promised himself that he would never get into such a state again and never give in to his fear. His magic finally woke up. It was activated and everything around was engulfed in flames. It was a huge fire lizard summoned by Wu Bin. The half-destroyed anthill was in complete chaos. It was hard to see where any of the A-team were or where the enemies were. Only a huge lizard was visible and the heat from it could be felt. But thanks to this spell, the course of the battle changed significantly. The team had a good chance to win. Chun Changwu was shocked by what he saw with his own eyes. The flame lizard literally knocked him off his feet. He barely managed to jump to the side. Now it was Chun Changwa's turn to hide somewhere to the side. Wu Bin was doing well on his own. Kong-san was as shocked as any other member of the team. The mage's spell was so powerful that no one could even imagine that such a thing was possible. Kong-san had an epiphany about what was going on. The key to this trial by adversity was the injured mage Yun Wu Bin. Kong-san shouted at him, wanting to ask for help. Kong-san asked to open a passage into the cave because only this could stop the ants. The ants continued to crawl out of the tunnels. The number did not decrease at all. It turned out that there were thousands of them. Yun Wu Bin smiled and aimed his spell at the newly set target. The flames from Wu Bin's spells instantly incinerated the ants. It was a powerful weapon against such monsters. Everything around him was ablaze, and the smoldering remains of monsters were scattered around him. Kong-san used the test shield at that very moment. However, the battle was not over yet, and the ants continued to arrive. Thanks to this spell, he attracted the attention of the monsters to himself. A huge soldier ant hurried towards him with a nasty squeak. Kong-san chopped it into pieces, giving Wu Bin the opportunity not to be distracted by anything else. Wu Bin was extremely focused on his goal and put all his strength into it. He directed a beam of fire over the entrances to the tunnel, trying to destroy the ground and cause it to collapse. Kong-san noted to himself that the mage had incredible reserves of mana and spell power which could not be said before. Well, the problem was that if the magician hadn't stopped, the whole team would have ended too. They ran for their lives. Kong-san picked up the wounded Chun Changwu and ran away from the mage with the rest of the team. Cho Hanbel shouted loudly, warning of danger. The ground began to crumble. The entire anthill began to collapse inward. Soon the ants were prevented from appearing again. The tunnels were blocked thanks to the magician. Kong-san tried to heal each team member's wounds. Chun Changwu got the worst of it. With the help of the restoration aura, Kong-san returned his body to its normal healthy state. Chun Changwu was surprised that Kong-san treated him first and not himself, because they had only known each other for one day and there had to be some boundaries for goodwill. Kong-san smiled and said that we just wanted to do it this way and he could wait. Although he laughed to himself, realizing that he was doing it only for the reward. The magician came up to them and immediately began to apologize because in theory he was supposed to heal everyone. Everyone else began to laugh at him. Kong-san was surprised out loud that after such a show the magician still had mana left. What if something went wrong? Kong-san suddenly stopped laughing. Immediately after, his strength left him and he fainted. The first person Kong-san saw when he woke up was the goddess Esmuna. She was sitting in front of him with her legs crossed and smiling slightly. When he saw it, he immediately jumped to his feet. He was very angry with the goddess for exposing him to great danger and suspected that she did it specifically to kill him. As Muna ignored his anger and stated that he had successfully passed the 6th test and had already received a reward, Kong Sen found that all of his stats had increased by a whopping 5 points. Increasing even one stat required a tremendous amount of effort and time, but he had gained 15 points in just one test. But he decided to ask the goddess a question. He asked whether he had to go through these trials alone and why other people were always drawn into them. He said that he couldn't have managed it on his own, and if Yun Woo-bin hadn't pulled himself together in the final test, the entire team would have died. He was indignant that they hadn't agreed on such conditions and he couldn't control the others. The goddess replied that the tests took into account all possible scenarios, including the fact that this moss would have ended up in the raid. She asked whether the guy had expected that they would lead him by the hand and help him grow. The goddess said that in that case he did not understand anything and figured that it would be easier for him to go through the trials alone. The girl came closer to him and explained that involving others in his affairs and going through difficult trials was his karma. She smiled and ruffled his hair, asking him to close his mouth and concentrate on passing the tests. Without waiting for an answer, the goddess asked again whether Kong San had understood her. He was incredibly angry and did not want to say a word. The goddess straightened his hair and told him to get up and leave if he understood what she told him. He should stop sleeping. He opened his eyes very abruptly and found himself in the same cave where he had lost consciousness. He did not immediately understand what was happening. It seemed to him that the meeting with the goddess was real and not in his vision. Kong Sen saw how the whole team was worried and ran up to him and asked him again if he had lost consciousness. He immediately felt a little dizzy. Kong Sen looked and asked why they were still in the anthill. Cho Hambyul replied that they couldn't get out. They were at a depth of about 10 meters. Chun Chong-woo said that he tried to climb the wall, but it was too steep and it was impossible. So he decided to wait for Kong San to wake up in the hopes that he would have some ideas. Cho Hambyul started laughing and asked if he had any scrolls to jump high or something. Chun Chong-woo took this very seriously and was indignant about why anyone would need such things. Cho Hambyul laughed even louder and said he was joking. But Kong San surprised everyone by saying that he had for such scrolls. Cho Hambyul was shocked that Kong San even carried such scrolls. His joke went beyond all bounds of unreality. Kong Sen replied that one should always be prepared for unexpected troubles. Chun Chong-woo smiled. He noted to himself that Kong San had some ant snacks and a bunch of strange scrolls with him. He thought this guy was very strange. But it made him laugh. The boys helped Kong San to his feet. They all linked hands before heading upstairs. They seemed to push off from the trampoline and simultaneously jumped up. They felt incredible strength and springiness in their legs due to the use of scrolls. This helped them jump very high and get out of the ant hole. The scroll had a very short duration of action, and as soon as they reached the top, its effects wore off. The jump scroll was a one-time use, and the effect disappeared immediately after use. Kong San's group reported the results of the raid to the Hunter organization. They did not find that they had made a mistake in assessing the information about the hunting site, so they offered the group free access to a C-rank raid and below, as well as a set of first aid potions. Cho Hambyul, Yun Woo-bin, and Chun Chong-woo decided that this was enough, and that was how it was decided. Kong Sen thought that if this happened every time he went on a raid, the organization would definitely have problems, and he might even get suspended. Suddenly a guy ran up to him and grabbed his hand with both of his and started shaking it. Kong Sen turned back in great surprise. It was Yun Woo-bin holding his hand tightly and asking him to let him go on the next raid with him. Yun Woo-bin assured that he was not just saying this. He promised that he would try to help the team. He looked very excited, and it was clear that this was important to him. Kong Sen smiled widely upon hearing this. He asked the mage if after everything they had been through they were still not a team. Hearing this, Yun Woo-bin squeezed Kong San's hand even tighter and thanked him. Yun Woo-bin and Chun Chong-woo were surprised by one of the words Kong San said, but it was quite outdated. Kong San had a habit of using dialect words when he was embarrassed. Chun Chong-woo reminded Kong San that he had said that his manager was absent and asked if that was still the case. Kong San was a little embarrassed but confirmed it. With great difficulty, he said goodbye to his very sociable teammates and breathed a sigh of relief as he headed home. Chun Chong-woo walked far enough away from everyone else and dialed the phone. He smiled as he heard the long beeps. This was related to the organization of the Chongsan. He spoke to one of the managers and hung up. Another girl who was also a manager asked her colleagues with whom she had spoken so that she now sighed. She shared that she had spoken with Chun Changwu, who suddenly decided that they should hire an E-rank hunter. The colleague was very surprised. How could this happen? She started swearing, "What is this guy thinking? I think they want to advance him through connections." The manager studied the profile of Kong-san, whom you wanted to promote. There was information that he had been stuck in the F rank for a long time. But Chun Changwu insisted that it was impossible to judge by numbers and insisted that Kong-san was the best hunter one could meet. The manager thought that if Chun Changwu helped me, he would blow it out of proportion and it would be bad for everyone. She decided to let this situation go and wrote down on the form next to Kong-san's name that he was recommended by Chun Changwu. The candidates were reviewed very quickly. Min-yuk was the first to see Kong-san's profile. He was very surprised by this, apparently hoping that he would personally be able to drag his friend into the company. He was absolutely sure that he saw Kong-san since there was a photo attached to the kanki. His gal asked who this guy was, having heard his name many times. Min-yuk replied that there was nothing special about this guy. His colleague did not believe it, noting that there had never been a time when someone recommended a rank E hunter, and all this was not without reason, and asked to review the questionnaire personally. Other office workers passing by started laughing at the fact that Min-yuk was being nagged again. The man replied that it was called care, not brainwashing. The man realized that this was the guy Min-yuk had already tried to hire, but nothing had worked out. It was interesting that half a year had not yet passed, and here he was already on the list of recommendations. Apparently he was really special. The man told Min-yuk that if Kong-san goes through the casting process and is accepted, he definitely doesn't know how to select personnel. He reminded Min-yuk that he couldn't answer anything last time either and ruined everything. The man gave the form back to Min-yuk and left him alone. The questionnaire was squeezed. The word's knees really hurt Min-yuk because it was really difficult to persuade Kong-san to do something. He crumpled the form angrily. As evening approached, Kong-san went out to the sports ground in the yard to do some exercise. After doing 40 pull-ups on the horizontal bar, he jumped to the ground to rest. Suddenly his phone vibrated and beeped, notifying him of a message. It was an emergency warning. An E-rank gate had opened in Wonsimni. He thought it was suspicious. This was the second episode in the same place. The brothers were only rank E, but they had been showing up too often lately. He thought that if he became a ranger, he would probably be sent to places like these. Only soldiers were sent to the rank E brothers. He pressed the phone to his chest and prayed that this time there would be no casualties. A vehicle with military personnel was sent immediately to eliminate the incident. Kim Chung-sik was in that car. He felt very anxious. He turned away from all the other soldiers so that they would not see the tears running down his cheeks.